Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is James Harrington, and I've been a park ranger for 15 years. I'm telling you this story because someone needs to know what really happened at Cumberland Gap in September of 1962. The official reports say it was a gas leak that made everyone sick. That's a lie. I grew up in coal mining country where my dad died in a cave-in when I was 12. That's why I became a ranger. I swore I'd never work underground again. Give me open sky and mountain trails any day. I thought I knew these mountains like my own backyard. I was wrong. Cumberland Gap sits right on the border between Kentucky and Tennessee. It's an ancient pass through the Appalachian Mountains where Native Americans and pioneers traveled for hundreds of years. The gap drops 600 feet through solid rock. On clear days, you can see for miles. But when the fog rolls in, you can't see your own hand in front of your face. The Cherokee called this place cursed. They had stories about spirit people who lived in the mountains. The Nunahai, they called them. White settlers brought their own ghost stories. The Bell Witch was the worst of them. Back in 1817, some family named Bell got tormented by an evil spirit. People said it followed the family bloodline, generation after generation. I never believed any of that nonsense. Ghosts and witches, that's just old mountain talk meant to scare kids around campfires. My daughter Emma was 17 that fall. She was coming on a school trip with her history class. 24 kids total, staying in the old log cabins we kept for educational groups. As the head ranger, I was responsible for keeping them safe. The weather turned strange that September. It should have been warm, but cold fog kept rolling through the gap at sunset. The temperature would drop 30 degrees in minutes, made your head pound something fierce. The kids arrived on a Tuesday afters, renewed, excited, and loud like teenagers always are. Emma waved at me from the bus, all smiles. She was proud her dad worked in such a beautiful place. The teachers, Mr. Peterson and Mrs. Chen, seemed like good people. They'd done trips like this before. We got the kids settled in the cabins just as the sun went down. That's when the first strange thing happened. At 3 a.m, Mrs. Chen came pounding on my cabin door. She looked scared. "Mr. Harrington," she said, "someone's been singing outside the girls' cabin. A woman's voice, singing lullabies. But when we looked outside, nobody was there." I grabbed my flashlight and followed her to the cabin. The girls were all awake, huddled together on their bunks. Emma looked pale. "Dad, it was so pretty," she said, "like my grandmother used to sing to me. But when we looked out the window, we couldn't see anyone." I walked around the cabin twice, shining my light into the woods. Nothing. No footprints in the soft dirt. No broken branches. No sign anyone had been there at all. "Probably just wind through the trees," I told them. "Mountain sounds can play tricks on you." But even as I said it, I felt uneasy. I'd been in these mountains my whole life. I knew what wind sounded like. This was something else. The next morning, things got worse. Mr. Peterson's radio wouldn't work right. Instead of park headquarters, it kept picking up children's laughter. The flashlights dimmed and brightened on their own. Compasses spun like crazy, pointing in all directions. "Equipment failure," I explained to the teachers. "Old gear acts up sometimes." But 3 of the boys swore they saw a woman in a white dress walk right through the cabin wall during breakfast. Just walked through solid wood like it wasn't there. I was starting to get a bad feeling about this trip. By Wednesday afternoon, I couldn't ignore what was happening anymore. There's too many kids were reporting the same things. Voices calling their names, cold spots in warm rooms, shadows moving when nobody was there. I called my fellow ranger, Patricia Morrison, for backup. Pat was tough as nails, a former military police officer who didn't scare easy. If anyone could help me figure this out, it was her. "You sound spooked, James," she said over the radio. "That's not like you. Just get up here, Pat. Something's not right." While I waited for her, I did what rangers do. I investigated. I checked every inch of those cabins for logical explanations. Loose boards that might creak, windows that might rattle, anything that could explain what the kids were experiencing. That's when I found the symbols. They were carved into the door frames of all 4 cabins, fresh cuts in the wood. But the strange thing was, they looked old, like they'd been there for years. But I'd inspected these cabins just that morning, and I swear those marks weren't there before. The symbols looked like nothing I'd ever seen, not Cherokee, not pioneer markings, just weird, twisted shapes that hurt your eyes to look at. I was still staring at them when the temperature dropped 20 degrees in 10 seconds. My breath came out in white puffs. Frost started forming on the cabin windows, even though it was 60 degrees outside. "Mr. Harrington?" Emma's voice came from behind me. She was standing in the doorway, but she looked different, older somehow. Her eyes were too bright. "Emma, you okay, honey?" "She wants to talk to you," Emma said in a voice that didn't sound quite like hers. "Who wants to talk to me?" But Emma just turned and walked back into the cabin like nothing had happened. Pat arrived just as the sun was setting. She took one look around and whistled low. "This place feels wrong, James. Like someone walking over your grave." We were talking by the fire pit when Pat suddenly went stiff. She was staring at the second cabin, the one where the boys were staying. "James," she whispered, "there's someone in that upstairs window." I looked where she was pointing. Clear as day, a woman's silhouette stood in the second-floor window. Long dress, long hair, perfectly still. "Pat," I said slowly, "that cabin only has 1 floor." We both stood there, staring. The figure didn't move, didn't even seem to breathe. Then the lights went out in every cabin at once. In the darkness, we heard it. A woman's voice, clear as a church bell, calling from the direction of the cabins. "Emma, Emma, child, come to me." I ran toward the sound, Pat right behind me. But when we got to the cabins, all the kids were accounted for. Emma was in her bunk, awake but confused. "Dad, what's wrong? Why are you both so scared?" That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on my porch with my rifle across my knees, watching the cabins. The fog rolled in thick around midnight, so thick I could barely see 10 feet. That's when the real nightmare began. The fog started moving wrong, swirling in patterns that defied the wind. And in those swirls I saw shapes. People walking through the mist. Men in old-fashioned clothes. Women in long dresses. Children holding hands. They were all heading toward the cabins. I radioed headquarters, but all I got was static filled with whispers in a language I didn't recognize. Old words. Ancient words. Around 3 a.m. I heard screaming from the boys' cabin. I ran through the fog, nearly tripping over roots and rocks I couldn't see. Inside the cabin, I found 2 boys at the bottom of the stairs, Kevin Thompson and Mike Rodriguez. Kevin's arm was bent at a wrong angle. Mike had a gash on his forehead. "Something pushed us," Kevin gasped. "Invisible hands, right in the chest. We went flying backward down the stairs." The other boys were huddled in the corner, eyes wide with terror. "It's still here," whispered Tommy Martinez. "In the bathroom. Listen." From behind the bathroom door came the sound of someone, or something, moving around. But when I opened the door, nobody was there. The small room was freezing cold, though. So cold that ice was forming on the mirror. I got on my radio. "Pat, we need to evacuate these kids. Now." But Pat didn't answer. Her radio was dead. I found her 20 minutes later at the bottom of Cumberland Gap, a 600-foot fall onto the rocks below. Her body was broken, but her face looked peaceful, almost like she'd jumped on purpose. In her hand was a note, written in her own handwriting. She told me it would stop the pain. Pat Morrison was the strongest person I knew. She would never give up, never. But something had made her jump. That's when I knew we weren't dealing with anything natural. We were trapped on this mountain with something that could get inside people's heads and make them do terrible things. and it seemed to want my daughter most of all. Thursday morning brought chaos. 3 kids were missing: Sarah Martinez, Kevin Thompson, and Lisa Wu. They'd vanished from their bunks sometime during the night. No signs of struggle, no footprints leading away from the cabins. I organized search teams, but the mountain itself seemed to be fighting us. Compasses pointed in different directions every few minutes. Trails that had been there for years suddenly led to dead ends. The fog never lifted, even when the sun came up. Mr. Peterson tried to call for help on the emergency phone, but the line was dead. Our vehicles wouldn't start. Someone had slashed all the tires in perfect geometric patterns. The keys were missing from the locked storage box. We were trapped. "Dad, I'm scared," Emma said, holding onto my arm. "I keep hearing that woman's voice. She knows things about our family, things nobody else should know." "What kind of things?" "She knows about Grandpa dying in the mine. She knows about the nightmares you still have. She says you can't protect me because you couldn't protect him." My blood went cold. I'd never told anyone about those nightmares, not even Emma's mother. That afternoon, the entity, whatever it was, decided to show itself properly. We were all gathered in the main cabin, trying to stay together for safety, when the temperature plummeted. Our breath came out in white clouds. Frost covered the windows in spiraling patterns. Then she appeared. She materialized right in the center of the room, a tall woman in a burial dress from the 1800s. Her face was beautiful and terrible at the same time, shifting between lovely and skeletal. Her eyes glowed with an inner fire that hurt to look at. The kids screamed and pressed back against the walls. Some of them fainted. "I am the Bell Witch," she said in a voice like wind through tombstones. "This mountain is mine. These children are mine. The girl especially." She pointed at Emma, who went rigid like she was frozen. "You cannot protect her, James Harrington, just as you could not protect your father. You are weak. You run from the depths because you are afraid." "Leave my daughter alone," I managed to say, though my voice was shaking. The Bell Witch laughed, and every window in the cabin shattered at once. "She carries the blood I need, Bell blood, from generations past. Through her, I will live forever." "That's impossible. We're not related to any Bell family." "Your great-grandmother was Mary Bell, you fool. The bloodline runs through the women, hidden but never lost. The girl will join me willingly, or I will take her by force." Emma stepped forward like she was sleepwalking. When she spoke, it was in the Bell Witch's voice. "I have waited so long," she said through Emma's mouth. "So many years in the cold ground. But now I can live again. I can feel again. I can hunt again." I lunged forward to grab Emma, but an invisible force threw me across the room. I hit the wall hard enough to crack the logs. "The blood must come to me willingly," the Bell Witch said, "or all will die. Choose, Ranger, your daughter's soul or every one's life." With that, she vanished. But Emma collapsed to the floor, gasping and shaking. "Dad? What happened? Why is everyone staring at me?" She didn't remember any of it. That night, the real horror began. The Bell Witch summoned an army of spirits, everyone who had ever died on this mountain. Cherokee warriors from centuries past, Civil War soldiers from both sides, pioneer families who had frozen to death in blizzards. They appeared in the fog around our cabins, hundreds of them, all staring at us with empty eyes. "This land is cursed," one of them moaned. "The witch feeds on death. She grows stronger with each soul she claims." I tried to lead the remaining kids, only 18 of them now, away from the cabins. But every trail led back to the same place. Every path through the woods curved around and brought us right back to where we started. The mountain wouldn't let us leave. Tommy Martinez was the next to die. We found him hanging from a tree branch 40 feet off the ground, impaled on a thick limb. No way he could have climbed that high. No way he could have fallen and landed like that. His last words, scrawled in the dirt below, "She promised it wouldn't hurt." Sarah Martinez's body turned up in an underground cave, frozen solid despite the mild weather. Her skin was white as snow, and she had a peaceful smile on her face. Lisa Wu was never found at all, just her shoes, sitting neatly by the edge of the cliff where Pat had jumped. The surviving kids were breaking down. Some couldn't stop crying. Others just stared at nothing, like their minds had snapped. Emma was getting worse too. Sometimes she'd speak in that other voice, saying things no 17-year-old should know. "Dad," she said during one of her lucid moments, "I can feel her in my head. She's showing me things, terrible things, people she's killed, families she's destroyed. She's been doing this for over 100 years. Fight her, Emma. Don't let her in. She's too strong, and she's hungry, so hungry." That's when I knew I had to do something desperate. I remembered St. Ori's, the old Cherokee, told about protective rituals, sacred circles that could hold evil spirits at bay. I had a Cherokee friend named Joseph Running Bear who lived down in the valley. He'd taught me some of the old ways when I first became a ranger. I prayed he was right about salt and sage being able to create barriers. Using the last of our emergency supplies, I made a circle around the remaining kids and teachers. Salt from the kitchen, sage from the mountainside, and prayers I only half remembered. It worked, but only barely. The Bell Witch couldn't enter the circle, but she stood just outside it, pacing like a caged animal. "You cannot hide them forever," she hissed. "I have all the time in the world. You have until sunrise. What do you want?" "The girl. Give me the girl, and the rest can go free." "Never." "Then they will all die, one by one, until only she remains." I looked at the terrified faces around me. 17 kids and 2 teachers depending on me to save them. My own daughter, fighting a battle inside her head against something ancient and evil. I had to find another way. Joseph Running Bear had told me something once when he was teaching me about the old stories. He said every curse had a source, some object or place where the evil first took root. Destroy the source, and you could break the curse. But first, I had to learn the truth about the Bell Witch. As dawn approached and my protective circle grew weaker, the entity finally told me her real story. "I was never human," she said, circling us like a shark. "I am the hunger that lives in the spaces between life and death. The Cherokee awakened me with their blood rituals centuries ago, trying to protect this land from invaders. But they could not control what they summoned." "Then how did you become the Bell Witch?" "The Bell family found my resting place in 1817. A burial mound deep in these mountains where the Cherokee had tried to contain me. John Bell thought it was just an old Indian grave. He dug it up, looking for artifacts to sell. The fog around us grew thicker, and I could see shapes moving in it, all the people she had killed over the years. I possessed his daughter first, sweet little Betsy Bell. Through her, I learned to feed on human fear and pain, but the family fought back. They found a way to bind me to their bloodline, thinking it would limit my power. But it didn't. It made me stronger. Every generation, I could claim one of their descendants. Their blood calls to me across the years. I followed the family west, picking them off one by one. Most of the Bell line is dead now." Emma jerked like someone had slapped her. When she looked up, her eyes were glowing. "But not all," she said in the Bell Witch's voice. "Mary Bell escaped to these mountains in 1847. She married a man named Morrison and changed her name. Her great-granddaughter married a Harrington." My blood turned to ice. Morrison. That was Pat's last name, too. "Patricia Morrison was my blood as well," the Bell Witch continued through Emma. "That's why she could see me so clearly. That's why she jumped when I commanded it. The blood always obeys." Emma stood up, moving like a puppet on strings. The other kids pressed back against the edge of my protective circle. "I grow tired of this game," the Bell Witch said. "The girl comes with me now." "No!" I grabbed Emma's arm, but she was stronger than any 17-year-old girl should be. She threw me aside like I weighed nothing. "Goodbye, Father," she said, and started walking toward the cliff. The other kids followed her, their eyes empty and staring. The Bell Witch was taking all of them. I had one chance left. Joseph Running Bear had told me about the burial mound, how the Cherokee had tried to contain the evil spirit there. If I could find it, maybe I could finish what they started. I ran through the fog, following an old deer trail that led up to the highest point of Cumberland Gap. Behind me I could hear the Bell Witch laughing and the sound of footsteps on stone, Emma and the others walking toward the cliff edge. The burial mound was hidden under a century of fallen leaves and mountain growth. But I could feel it, a wrongness in the earth, like a wound that had never healed. I started digging with my bare hands, throwing aside dirt and rocks and roots. My fingers were bleeding, but I didn't stop. I could hear the Bell Witch calling from below. "Too late, Ranger. They're mine now. All of them." Then my hand touched something hard and cold. A stone box buried 6 feet down. Inside was a book, an old Bible, but not like any I'd ever seen. The pages were made of human skin. The words were written in blood. This was the source. The original Bell family Bible, the one John Bell had been carrying when he first disturbed the burial mound. The Cherokee had buried it here, trying to contain the evil it had absorbed. I could hear footsteps behind me. Emma was climbing up the trail, her eyes still glowing. The other kids following like zombies. "Give me the book, Father," she said in that terrible voice. "It belongs to me." "Like hell it does." I pulled out my lighter and flicked it on. The flame danced in the mountain wind. "You destroy that, and the girl dies with me," the Bell Witch warned. "Maybe, but the others will live." "Dad, no!" For just a moment, Emma's real voice broke through. "Don't sacrifice yourself for us." "I love you, honey. Remember that." I touched the flame to the ancient pages. The book caught fire like it was soaked in gasoline. Black smoke poured out, and the Bell Witch's scream shattered every piece of glass for miles around. The ground shook like an earthquake. Emma and the other kids collapsed as the spirit was ripped out of them. The fog lifted all at once, and I could see the sunrise painting the mountains gold and red. The Bell Witch appeared, and last time, her beautiful face twisted with rage. "This is not over," she hissed. "The bloodline continues. I will find another way." "Not if I can help it." She faded away as the book turned to ash in my hands. But her laughter echoed across the mountains long after she was gone. The official report blamed everything on a natural gas leak from an underground pocket. The Park Service brought in experts who found trace amounts of methane that could cause hallucinations. They installed monitoring equipment all over Cumberland Gap and banned overnight camping permanently. 18 kids survived out of 24. None of them remembered the supernatural events. Their minds had blocked it all out. They thought they'd all gotten sick from bad air and had shared nightmares. Emma was one of the survivors, but she was changed. She couldn't remember what happened, but she developed a deep fear of mountains and forests. She'd wake up screaming from dreams she couldn't recall. We moved to Florida 6 months later, as far from the Appalachians as we could get. I tried to forget about Cumberland Gap, but it haunted me. I'd done research after the incident and learned the truth about our family history. We really were descended from Mary Bell, and the Cherokee burial mound was real. The Park Service had quietly sealed it with concrete after my report. For years, I thought it was over. Emma grew up, got married, had children of her own. She seemed happy, living by the ocean where no mountains could remind her of that terrible night. But last month, I got a call that chilled my blood. Emma's daughter, my granddaughter Sarah, was going on a school trip, a historical expedition to study Appalachian folklore. They were going to Cumberland Gap. I tried to talk them out of it, but how do you explain something like this without sounding crazy? The Park Service's official position is that the area is safe now, monitored 24/7 for gas leaks. Sarah is 18, the same age Emma was. She has the same dark hair, the same bright eyes, and according to the genealogy research I've done, she carries the Bell bloodline just as strongly as her mother did. I'm driving to Cumberland Gap tonight. I have to be there when her group arrives. I have to protect her. Because 3 days ago, hikers reported hearing a woman's voice singing lullabies near the old cabin sites, and last night the Park Service lost radio contact with their monitoring station at the Gap. The Bell Witch kept her promise. She found another way. The bloodline continues, and she's calling to it across the mountains. I can feel it in my bones, that same wrongness I felt 50 years ago. The fog is rolling in earlier now. The animals are avoiding the area. She's back, and she's hungry. I just pray I'm not too late to save my granddaughter from the same fate that claimed so many others. The mountains keep their secrets, but some secrets are too dangerous to stay buried. If you're reading this and something happens to me, remember one thing. Stay away from Cumberland Gap when the fog rolls in. Some places are cursed for a reason. And if you ever hear a woman's voice singing lullabies where no woman should be, run. Run as fast as you can and don't look back. The Bell Witch is always listening, always hunting, always hungry for blood that carries the old curse. Final word count, approximately 4,200 words, 15 to 16-minute reading time. My name is Michael Ravencrest, and I've been a park ranger at Monongahela National Forest for 14 years. Before that, I flew helicopters in Vietnam. I figured after all that chaos, watching over trees and hikers would be peaceful. I was wrong. It was December 1977 when everything changed. The worst blizzard in 20 years had hit West Virginia, dumping 15 feet of snow across our 919,000 acres of wilderness. Wind howled at 60 miles per hour, and you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. Most folks were smart enough to stay home. But Dr. Jennifer Walsh and her research team weren't most folks. They'd been camping up near Spruce Knob, studying how old chemical spills from the 60s were affecting local wildlife. The Cherokee used to call this area home, and they had stories about a thunderbird that protected the mountains. I never put much stock in old legends. The team's last radio contact came in around midnight on December 15th. Walsh's voice crackled through the static. "Base camp, we've got a situation. There's something out here. Some kind of impossible bird. Wings must be 15 feet across. It's circling our camp and..." Then nothing. Dead air. I tried raising them for 2 hours. Protocol said to wait until morning, but something in Walsh's voice stuck with me. She was a tough scientist, not the type to panic over a big owl. When dawn broke gray and bitter, I assembled my best team, 6 experienced rangers who knew these mountains like their own backyards. The helicopter ride up should have taken 30 minutes. Instead, it took 2 hours fighting the wind. That's when pilot Jerry Martinez spotted something that made his face go white. "Ravencrest, you seeing this?" He pointed through the windscreen. Below us, a massive shadow moved against the wind. Not with it, against it. The thing was huge, bigger than any bird I'd ever seen. Its seamen had to notice our helicopter and change direction, flying straight toward us at impossible speed. "Get us out of here," I told Jerry. He didn't need to be asked twice. We found the research camp 2 hours later, or what was left of it. 3 reinforced winter tents were shredded from above, torn like tissue paper. Equipment was scattered everywhere, some of it hanging from tree branches 40 feet up. The team's truck sat untouched, keys still in the ignition. But no bodies, no blood, just those massive claw marks in the frozen ground, each one 8 inches long and spaced like something with a 15-foot wingspan had landed hard. "What kind of animal could do this?" asked Ranger David Kim, crouching next to the deepest gouges. I'd seen plenty of animal attacks in my time. Bears, mountain lions, even aggressive eagles. This was different. These claw marks were too precise, too deliberate. Whatever made them had intelligence. That's when we heard the screech. It came from somewhere above the tree line, echoing off the mountain walls. Not quite bird, not quite human, but something in between. The sound made my teeth ache and sent ice through my veins. "We need to find those people," I said, checking my rifle. "Whatever's out here, we're going to find them first." We spent the first day following scattered equipment trails. Maria Santos, our best tracker, found pieces of the team's gear spread over 2 miles. always in the trees, always too high for any normal predator to reach. The forest felt wrong. In 14 years of ranging these mountains, I'd never seen them so quiet. No deer tracks, no bird calls, no squirrel chatter. Even the wind seemed muffled, like the whole wilderness was holding its breath. "Radio's acting up," reported James Wilson, tapping his equipment. "Getting interference on all channels." Mine was doing the same thing. GPS readings jumped around like we were moving at 50 miles per hour while standing still. The closer we got to where the research team had been working, the worse it got. By evening, we'd set up base camp in a clearing, about 3 miles from the attack site. I'd just finished checking the perimeter when Kim called out from the edge of camp. "Got something here. You need to see this." He was standing next to a massive oak tree, pointing up. The bark had been stripped away in perfect spirals, like someone had used a giant potato peeler. But that wasn't the strange part. Balanced on branches 30 feet up were rocks, dozens of them, arranged in perfect circles. "Animals don't do that," whispered Santos. That's when we found Jennifer Walsh. She was curled up inside a hollow log about a quarter mile from our camp, barely conscious and half frozen. Her winter coat was torn across the back, 4 parallel gashes that went deep but hadn't hit anything vital. The spacing matched those claw marks perfectly. We got her warmed up and gave her hot coffee. When she could finally talk, her story made my blood run cold. "It hunted us," she said, staring into the fire. "For 3 days it hunted us. Picked us off one by one. Tom Morrison was first, grabbed him right out of his sleeping bag and carried him up into the trees. We could hear him screaming for almost an hour." She took a shaky sip of coffee. "Sarah Chen tried to run for the truck. It dropped her from about 100 feet up, right in front of us, like it wanted us to see." "What exactly did you see?" I asked. Walsh looked at me with hollow eyes. 8 feet tall when it stood up. Wings like a bat, but bigger than any plane. Red eyes that glowed in the dark. And it was smart, Ranger Ravencrest. Smarter than any animal should be. It knew we'd try for the radio first, so it destroyed the antenna. Knew we'd try for the truck, so it ripped out the engine. It was playing with us. "Where are the others?" Santos asked gently. "Gone. All gone. It saved me for last. Wanted me to remember. To tell people." Walsh grabbed my arm with fingers like ice. "It's still out there. It knows you're here." That's when the screeching started again, closer this time. Much closer. Wilson spun around, rifle ready. "What the hell was that?" The sound came from directly above us. We all looked up at once, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. For just a second, maybe less, I saw something impossible perched in the trees. Red eyes like burning coals, wings spread wide enough to block out the stars. Then it was gone. "Did everyone see that?" Kim whispered. We all nodded. There was no denying it now. Whatever had taken Walsh's team was real, and it was watching us. I made the call to pack up and move deeper into the forest. The thing seemed to know our location, but maybe we could find better defensive ground. As we broke camp, I noticed our equipment wasn't just malfunctioning anymore. It was being sabotaged. Someone had cut precise slices in our radio antenna cable. The GPS unit's screen was cracked in a perfect spiral pattern. Even our spare batteries were drained, though they'd been full that morning. "It's learning about our gear," I told the team. "Stay together. Nobody goes anywhere alone." We hiked for 2 hours in the snow, following an old mining trail toward higher ground. Behind us, that horrible screeching followed at a distance, never quite close enough to see clearly, never far enough away to forget. The abandoned mine shaft wasn't much to look at, but it offered shelter from the wind and only one way in or out. I figured we could defend it if we had to. I was wrong about that too. We'd been there maybe 4 hours when David Kim volunteered for first watch. I should have said no, should have kept us all together. But Kim was tough and experienced, and I figured 2 hours outside wouldn't hurt. I woke up to Maria Santos shaking me hard. "Kim's gone." We found him at dawn, 200 feet up the cliff face above all, near mine entrance. His body was wedged into a crack in the rock, positioned like he'd been carefully placed there. The claw wounds through his chest were precise. Whoever did this knew exactly where to strike for a quick kill. But the worst part was his face. Kim's eyes were wide open, staring down at our mine entrance like he was still on watch duty. "It's sending us a message," Walsh said quietly. She'd been awake all night, staring at the mine entrance. "It wants us to know we can't hide." She was right. Over the next day, more signs appeared. Trees around our shelter were stripped of bark in perfect geometric patterns. Rocks were stacked in impossible towers that shouldn't have been able to stand up. And always that screeching sound coming from different directions. Wilson cracked first. On the second night, he started talking to himself, muttering about red eyes and flying shadows. When Santos tried to calm him down, he grabbed his rifle and headed for the mine entrance. "I'm going to kill that thing," he said. "End this nightmare." I tackled him before he could get outside, but the damage was done. Whatever was out there had heard the commotion. The screeching got louder, more excited, like it was pleased we were falling apart. That's when Santos saw the second one. "There," she whispered, pointing through a crack in the mine wall. "On the ridge." Another pair of red eyes glowed in the darkness, bigger than the first. This one stood on the cliff top, wings spread wide, calling to its partner with that bone-chilling screech. "Two of them," I said. "Maybe more." Walsh nodded grimly. "They work together. One distracts while the other attacks. That's how they got my team." As if summoned by her words, both creatures took flight. Even in the darkness, their massive forms blocked out stars as they circled our position. The sound of their wings was like helicopter blades, but wrong somehow. Too slow, too powerful. Wilson broke free from my grip and ran for the entrance. "I can't take it anymore." He made it maybe 20 feet before something huge slammed into him from above. In the split second of our flashlight beams, I saw it clearly for the first time. 8 feet tall, covered in dark feathers that seemed to absorb light, wings that stretched at least 15 feet, and those eyes, red as fresh blood, burning with an intelligence that was definitely not animal. The thing that had grabbed Wilson looked directly at me. For just a moment, our eyes met. I felt something probing at my mind, cold and alien and impossibly old. Then it took off with Wilson in its claws, carrying him up into the darkness. We could hear him screaming for almost 10 minutes. "Why is it doing this?" Santos asked, tears freezing on her cheeks. Walsh had an answer, but I didn't want to hear it. "We're in its territory. My team was studying the old chemical contamination up here, stuff from the TNT plant in the 60s. I think that's what created these things. Mutations mixed with something older, something the Cherokee knew about." The pieces were starting to fit together. The local tribes had always said this area was protected by spirits. Maybe they weren't spirits. Maybe they were guardians, creatures that had adapted to protect the mountains from human interference. But understanding them didn't make them any less deadly. Both creatures landed on the cliff above our mine entrance. Their calls echoed through the tunnels, a sound like breaking glass mixed with human screams. They were communicating, planning something. "We can't stay here," I said. "They know exactly where we are." Santos checked her rifle. "Where can we go? They control the whole mountain." I looked deeper into the mine shaft. The old tunnels stretched for miles underground, built by miners who'd worked these mountains for generations. Maybe we could find another way out. Maybe we could reach help. Or maybe we'd just die in the dark instead of under the stars. "Pack ever. A thing," I told them. "We're going deeper." The mine tunnels were a maze of connecting passages that went deeper into the mountain than I'd ever imagined. Our flashlights showed ancient tool, marks on the walls, and rusty mining equipment scattered throughout. Some of these shafts hadn't seen humans in 50 years, but we weren't alone down here. The creatures had followed us underground. I could hear their wings scraping against stone walls, see their red eyes glowing in side passages. Somehow, despite their size, they moved through the tunnels like they'd been born here. "This doesn't make sense," Walsh whispered as we pressed deeper into the mountain. "How can something that big fly through spaces this narrow?" I was wondering the same thing when Santos grabbed my arm. "Listen." From somewhere ahead came a sound I'd never heard before, a low humming that seemed to vibrate through the rock itself. It wasn't quite music, but it had rhythm and pattern, like a song sung in a language no human throat could produce. We followed the sound through a maze of connecting tunnels until we reached a massive underground chamber. Our flashlights couldn't reach the ceiling, but they lit up something that made us all freeze in terror. The walls were covered in spirals and circles, carved deep into the living rock. Some looked ancient, maybe centuries old. Others were fresh, the stone dust still scattered on the floor. And in the center of the chamber sat a pile of human belongings, backpacks, cameras, hiking boots, all arranged in careful patterns. "My team's gear," Walsh breathed. That's when I realized the truth. This wasn't just hunting territory. It was a sacred place, and we were trespassing on something far older than European settlement of these mountains. The humming stopped. In the sudden silence, I heard breathing that wasn't ours, slow, deep, and coming from directly above us. I tilted my flashlight up and saw both creatures perched on ledges near the chamber ceiling. They were motionless, watching us with those burning red eyes, waiting. "They brought us here," I said quietly. "This whole time, they've been herding us toward this place." One of the creatures dropped from its perch and landed 20 feet away. This close, I could see details that would haunt my dreams forever. Its face was almost human, but covered in dark feathers. Its hands had long clawed fingers that looked capable of tool use. And those eyes, they held an intelligence that was definitely not animal. The creature opened its mouth and made a sound that was almost words, almost human speech, but filtered through a throat that wasn't built for human language. "It's trying to communicate," Walsh said in amazement. The second creature landed beside the first. Together they began making those almost words, gesturing toward the carved walls with their clawed hands. I couldn't understand the sounds, but their meaning became clear as images flashed through my mind. The forest before European settlement, Native Americans living in harmony with creatures that flew between the mountains in the spirit world. Chemical contamination poisoning the land in the 1960s. Ancient guardians changing, adapting, becoming something new to protect what remained of the old ways. "They're not monsters," I said, understanding flooding through me. "They're protectors. The contamination changed them, but they're still trying to guard this place." The larger creature stepped closer. When it looked at me, I felt that cold presence in my mind again, but gentler this time. Images flowed between us. My memories of the forest, its memories of watching humans poison the land it was sworn to protect. It showed me Walsh's research team setting up equipment near a sacred site, taking samples from contaminated soil that had been sealed off for good reason. From the creature's perspective, they weren't scientists. They were invaders threatening a fragile balance that had taken decades to achieve. Santos had her rifle raised, but I pushed the barrel down. "Don't! It's not attacking." The creature's mate landed beside it and began arranging objects from the pile. Walsh's camera, water sample container, a soil testing kit. It was showing us what it had taken, explaining why. But our peaceful moment didn't last. A third screech echoed through the chamber, different from the others, younger, more aggressive. A juvenile creature dropped from the darkness above, landing between us and its parents with wings spread wide and talons extended. This one wasn't interested in communication. It saw us as threats to be eliminated. The young creature lunged toward Santos. I shoved her aside and raised my rifle, but the adult creatures moved faster. The larger one tackled its offspring, sending both of them crashing into the chamber wall. They rolled across the floor in a tangle of wings and claws, screeching at each other in their almost language. "It's protecting us," Walsh said in amazement. "From its own young." The family argument didn't last long. The adults were bigger and clearly in charge. After a few minutes of violent screeching, the juvenile backed down, folding its wings and moving to the far side of the chamber. But the damage was done. In the struggle, Santos had been caught by one of the juvenile's claws. Blood ran down her arm from 4 parallel gashes that matched the ones on Walsh's back. The adult creatures looked at the blood, then at each other. They made soft clicking sounds that might have been their version of apologies. Then the larger one did something that changed everything. It approached Santos slowly, its clawed hands extended. When she didn't back away, it gently touched the wounds on her arm. Where its fingers made contact, the bleeding stopped. "Healing," Santos whispered. "It's healing me." The creature stepped back and gestured toward the chamber entrance. The message was clear. It was time for us to leave their sacred place, but it would let us go. The creatures escorted us through the mine tunnels to an exit we never would have found on our own. It opened into a ravine about 5 miles from where we'd entered, well outside their protected territory. Dawn was breaking over the mountains when we finally reached the Forest Service road. A military convoy was waiting for us. Black vehicles with government plates and men in uniforms I didn't recognize. "Rangers," said a colonel with cold eyes and no name tag. "You've been through a traumatic experience. Severe weather, equipment failure, tragic accidents. That's what happened here." I started to protest, but he held up a hand. "Dr. Walsh's research has been classified for national security reasons. The area where her team was working is now off limits to civilian access, environmental hazard zone. They took our statements, confiscated our cameras, and made us sign papers that basically said we'd keep our mouths shut or face federal charges. Within a week, the whole section of forest was fenced off with military-grade barriers. The official story was equipment failure during severe weather conditions. Kim, Wilson, and Walsh's 3 team members had died from exposure after becoming separated during the blizzard. The media bought it. Most people bought it. But the locals knew better. Old-timers in the mountain communities started talking about the return of the Thunderbirds, Cherokee spirits that protected the high country from those who would harm it. They said the creatures only appeared during the worst storms, warning people to stay away from places they shouldn't go. I stayed on as a ranger for 5 more years, but I never went back to that part of the forest. Sometimes during winter storms, I'd get reports of unusual bird activity near the restricted zone. Pilots flying over the area reported massive shadows moving against the wind. Hunters claimed to hear strange screeching sounds that didn't match any known wildlife. The government installed monitoring equipment throughout the contaminated area, officially to track environmental cleanup progress. Unofficially, I think they were keeping watch for other unusual developments. Whatever had created those creatures might have affected other species too. Dr. Walsh recovered from her ordeal, though she never talked publicly about what happened. She left field research and took a teaching position at a small college in Virginia. Sometimes she'd call me, usually late at night after she'd been drinking. "Do you think we did the right thing?" she'd ask, keeping quiet about them. I always gave her the same answer. "They let us live, Doc. That means something." The truth is, I came to respect what those creatures were doing. They weren't monsters. They were the last guardians of a poisoned wilderness, trying to prevent further damage to land that had already suffered too much from human interference. These days I work for the Environmental Protection Agency, helping expand contamination cleanup efforts in sensitive wilderness areas. It's my way of honoring the agreement we made in that underground chamber. If we take better care of the wild places, maybe we won't need supernatural guardians to protect them from us. But on winter nights when the wind howls through the mountains, I sometimes look up at the sky and wonder if they're still out there. The Mothman of Monongahela, watching over their territory, making sure the old mistakes don't get repeated. Part of me hopes they are, because some places are worth protecting, even if it takes monsters to do it. My name is Robert Thornfield, and I've been a park ranger for 16 years. I know these Arkansas woods like my own backyard. The Ouachita National Forest is my beat, all 1.8 million acres of it. I've tracked bears, caught poachers, and rescued lost hikers more times than I can count. But what happened in August of 1984 changed everything I thought I knew about these woods. I grew up hearing the stories. Every kid in Arkansas knows about the Fook monster. Back in the 70s, folks claimed they saw a giant hairy man walking through the swamps. My grandfather used to tell me about the old Choctaw legends. They called it Champay, which meant something like giant hairy man. Even the French trappers from way back in the 1800s wrote about a loup-garou in these parts. I never believed any of it. Bears can stand up on their hind legs when they're curious or scared. In the dark, with adrenaline pumping, a black bear could look like just about anything your mind wanted it to be. That's what I told myself for 16 years. August came in hot that year. We're talking 100-degree days with humidity so thick you could cut it with a knife. The air sat on you like a wet blanket. Thunderstorms rolled through every few days, bringing dangerous lightning but not much relief from the heat. The logging roads turned to mud, then baked hard as concrete, then turned to mud again. My brother-in-law Jake owns a hunting lodge about 30 miles from the nearest town. It's a nice place. He built it himself on a little lake deep in the forest. Cell phones don't work out there. The only way to talk to the outside world is an old CB radio that works when it wants to. Jake had family visiting that week. His wife, Sarah, their 2 kids, his parents, Sarah's sister with her husband, and 3 kids. 12 people total, including Jake. They'd been planning this reunion for months. I was supposed to join them on my days off. That's when the radio crackled to life in the ranger station. "Wichita Base, this is Jake's lodge. We got a problem out here." Jake's voice came through full of static, but I could hear something else underneath. Fear. My partner Sam grabbed the radio. "Jake, this is Ranger Station 7. What's your situation?" "There's something... Jesus, I don't know how to explain this. There's this thing outside. It looks like a man, but it's huge. 9 feet tall, maybe bigger, covered in hair. Dark hair, all over. It's been throwing logs at the lodge for the past hour." Sam and I looked at each other. "Jake, have you been drinking?" Sam asked. "I'm stone cold sober, Sam. This thing, it's smart. It tested the doors, tried the windows. It knows what it's doing. We're all locked inside, and it won't leave." I took the radio. "Jake, it's Robert. Did you get a good look at it?" "Clear as day. It was standing by the lake when I first saw it, drinking water. When it saw me watching from the window, it stood up, on 2 legs like a person. But the face, it's not human, Robert. The eyes are wrong, too smart. It looked right at me, and I swear it was thinking." That's when we heard it through the radio. A sound I'd never heard before and hoped to never hear again. It was like a roar and a scream mixed together, but there was something almost like words in it, something that made the hair on my arms stand up. "It's back," Jake whispered into the radio. "Oh God, it's back." I grabbed my gear and loaded up the truck. Sam came with me, along with 2 other rangers, Patricia Williams and Tom Martinez. We brought tranquilizer guns, riot gear, and emergency medical supplies. Standard procedure for dangerous wildlife encounters. The drive out to Jake's lodge took longer than usual. The recent storms had washed out part of the main logging road. We had to take the long way around, through some of the densest forest in Arkansas. The trees grew so thick in places that it was dark as twilight, even in the middle of the day. About 2 miles from the lodge, we started finding the footprints. I've tracked everything that walks in these woods. Bear, deer, wild boar, even the occasional mountain lion. These prints were like nothing I'd ever seen. They were huge, 18 inches long and 7 inches wide. But they weren't bear prints. They had 5 toes, just like a human, but the proportions were all wrong. The big toe was massive and the foot was too wide for any person. "What do you think made these?" Patricia asked, kneeling down next to one of the clearer prints. I studied the impression in the mud. The depth told me we were looking at something that weighed at least 800 pounds. The spacing between prints showed a walking gait, not the loping run of a bear. This thing walked upright, like a person. "I don't know," I said. And that was the truth. The smell hit us about a mile from the lodge. It was like nothing I'd ever smelled before. A mix of wet dog, rotting plants, and something else. Something wild and old. It made my stomach turn and triggered some deep instinct that told me to run. "Jesus," Tom said, covering his nose with his shirt. "What is that?" "That's our target," I said, though I was starting to doubt what our target actually was. When we got close to the lodge, we stopped the truck and went in on foot. The place was a mess. Logs and branches were scattered everywhere, like a tornado had hit. But this wasn't random damage. The logs were arranged in a rough circle around the lodge, like someone had been testing the building's defenses. The front porch had claw marks, deep gouges in the wood that looked like they came from fingers, not claws. But they were too big to be human fingers. Each mark was as long as my hand. Jake met us at the door. He looked like he'd aged 10 years since I'd seen him last week. His face was pale and his hands shook when he unlocked the deadbolt. "Thank God you're here," Waddy said. "It's been quiet for the last hour, but I know it's still out there. I can feel it watching." Inside, the family was huddled in the main room. The kids were trying to be brave, but I could see the fear in their eyes. Sarah's sister Mary was crying softly. The men were trying to look calm, but their hands kept drifting to the hunting rifles they'd laid out on the table. "Tell me exactly what happened," I said. Jake poured himself a coffee with hands that still shook. "It started yesterday evening. I was on the porch, and I heard this sound from across the lake. Like someone chopping wood, but the rhythm was wrong. Too fast, too regular. I grabbed the binoculars and looked over there." He paused, took a sip of coffee, then continued. "At first, I thought it was a person. It was standing by the water, and it had the right shape, you know? 2 arms, 2 legs standing upright. But when I focused the glasses, I could see it wasn't human. Too big, too hairy. And the way it moved, there's no person on earth that strong." "What was it doing?" "Breaking trees. Not cutting them down, breaking them, grabbing them with its hands and snapping them like twigs. Trees that would take 3 men with a chainsaw to cut down. It was making a pile of logs like it was building something." Sarah spoke up from across the room. "Show him the pictures, Jake." Jake handed me a Polaroid camera. I managed to get a few shots before it saw me. The pictures were blurry, but clear enough. The thing in the photos was definitely not a bear. It stood on 2 legs, had long arms, and was covered in dark hair. Its face was partially visible in one shot. Definitely not human, but not quite ape either. The eyes reflected the camera flash, glowing white in the photo. "After I took the pictures, it looked right at me," Jake said, "like it knew I was watching. Then it started walking around the lake toward the lodge. That's when I called everyone inside and locked the doors." "How long did it stay outside?" "Hours. It walked around the building, tested the doors and windows. At one point it climbed up on the roof. We could hear it walking around up there like it was looking for a way in. Then it started throwing the logs." Patricia was examining the windows. "These scratch marks," she said. "They're fresh. And look at this. It's like someone was trying to pry the window frame loose." I looked where she was pointing. Deep gouges in the wood showed where something had tried to force the window open. But the marks were too wide to be made by any tool I knew of. They looked like finger marks, but fingers strong enough to dig into solid wood. That's when we heard it. The sound came from behind the lodge, low and rumbling. It wasn't quite a growl, wasn't quite a roar. There was something almost musical about it, like it was trying to communicate. Everyone in the room went dead silent. The kids moved closer to their parents. Jake picked up his rifle. I motioned for my team to get ready, then moved to the back window. Through the glass, I could see movement in the tree line. Something big was moving between the trees, but staying in the shadows. "Is that it?" Patricia whispered. I nodded. "Everyone stay calm. Stay quiet." The thing moved closer to the clearing. I could see it better now. Definitely walking on 2 legs. Definitely not human. It was massive, at least 9 feet tall and built like a bodybuilder. Its whole body was covered in dark brown hair, almost black. The face was the worst part. It looked almost human, but the proportions were wrong. The jaw was too big, the forehead too low, and the eyes were intelligent. It wasn't just an animal. It was thinking. It stopped at the edge of the clearing and looked directly at the window where I was standing. For a long moment we stared at each other. Then it did something that chilled me to the bone. It waved. Not like a friendly greeting, more like it was acknowledging that it knew I was there, that it knew I was watching, like it was saying hello before the real show started. Then it picked up a log that had to weigh 300 pounds and threw it at the lodge like it was a baseball. The log hit the side of the building with a crash that shook the whole lodge. Kids started crying. Jake pumped his rifle and headed for the door. "Nobody goes outside," I said, grabbing his arm. "We don't know what we're dealing with yet." "It's trying to break down my home with my family inside," Jake said. "I'm not going to sit here and let it happen." "And I'm not going to let you get yourself killed," I said. "Give me a minute to think." Another log hit the building, this one closer to the window. The glass cracked but didn't break. Whatever was out there, it had good aim. I got on the radio. "Wichita Base, this is Thornfield. We have a situation at Jake's Lodge. I need backup and I need the sheriff's department." Static came back, then more static. The radio was dead. "Damn thing never works when you need it," Sam said, fiddling with the controls. "It worked fine on the way out here," Patricia said. "Something's jamming the signal." That's when I noticed my compass. The needle was spinning slowly, like it couldn't find magnetic north. I showed it to Tom. "That's weird," he said. "Let me check mine." His compass was doing the same thing. All our equipment was acting up. The radios, the compasses. Even my watch had stopped. "This isn't natural," Patricia said. "Whatever's out there, it's putting out some kind of electromagnetic field." Another log hit the building, then another. But these weren't random throws. The thing was methodically testing the structure, hitting the same spots over and over. It was looking for weak points. "It's trying to bring the building down," Tom said. I had to make a decision. Tom, you stay here with the family. Patricia, you're with me. We're going outside." "Robert, that's suicide," Sarah said. "Maybe, but if we don't do something, that thing's going to get in here eventually. At least outside we can move around." Patricia and I checked our tranquilizer guns and headed for the back door. The plan was simple. Circle around behind the creature and try to get a clean shot with the tranks. If that didn't work, we had regular rifles as backup. The smell outside was even stronger. It was like walking into a wall of stench. I had to breathe through my mouth to keep from gagging. We moved carefully around the side of the building. The creature had stopped throwing logs and gone quiet. That worried me more than the noise had. I found more footprints in the soft earth near the lake. These were fresh, still filling with water from the muddy ground. I knelt down to examine them. That's when Patricia grabbed my shoulder and pointed. Across the lake, maybe 200 yards away, something was watching us. It stood perfectly still among the trees on the far shore. At that distance, it looked like a person, but I knew better. It was too tall, too broad across the shoulders. "How did it get over there so fast?" Patricia whispered. Good question. We'd been watching the area around the lodge. There was no way something that big could have moved that far without us seeing it. "Maybe there's more than one," I said. That thought sent a chill down my spine. One of these things was bad enough. If there were more... A branch snapped behind us. We spun around, tranquilizer guns ready. Nothing there. Just trees and shadows. Another branch snapped, this time to our right, then to our left. We were being surrounded. "Back to the lodge," I said. "Now." We ran for the building, but before we could reach the door, something stepped out of the trees in front of us. It was close enough that I could see every detail. 9 feet tall, just like Jake had said. Covered in coarse, dark hair that was almost black. The body was massively muscled, like a weightlifter's, but the proportions were wrong. The arms hung down past its knees. The hands were huge, with fingers like sausages. The face was the worst part. It looked like someone had tried to make a human face but had gotten the measurements wrong. The jaw stuck out, the forehead sloped back, and the nose was flat and wide. But the eyes were human, intelligent, aware. It looked at me for a long moment, then made a sound. Not a roar or a growl, but something almost like speech, like it was trying to say something in a language I didn't understand. Patricia raised her tranquilizer gun. The creature's head snapped toward her, and its expression changed. The almost curious look turned to anger. It bared its teeth. Huge yellow teeth that belonged in a bear's mouth, not a human face. It took a step toward us. That's when Patricia fired. The tranquilizer dart hit the creature in the chest. It looked down at the dart, then back at us. For a second I thought it would work. The creature swayed slightly and I hoped it would go down. Instead, it reached up and plucked the dart out like it was a splinter. It examined the dart for a moment, then crushed it between its fingers. Then it roared. The sound was so loud it hurt my ears. It was rage and challenge and warning all mixed together. And underneath it all, there was something that sounded almost like words. The creature charged. I shoved Patricia to the side and dove the other way. The creature's hand swept through the space where I'd been standing, fingers as thick as baseball bats whistling through the air. I rolled, came up running, and sprinted for the lodge. Behind me, I could hear the thing chasing us, its footsteps shaking the ground. We made it to the door and burst inside. Sam slammed it shut and threw the deadbolt. "What happened?" Jake asked. "Tranquilizers don't work," I said, gasping for air. "And I think there's more than one of them." That's when something hit. The roof. The whole building shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. Then we heard footsteps above us. Heavy, deliberate footsteps walking from one end of the roof to the other. "It's on the roof," Tom said, unnecessarily. The footsteps stopped directly over the main room where we were all gathered. Then something started scratching at the roof. Long, steady scratches, like claws or fingers digging into the shingles. "It's trying to tear through," Jake said. A piece of ceiling tile fell and landed on the table. Then another. The scratching got louder, more urgent. "Everyone get away from the center of the room," I said. We moved toward the walls, just as a shingle fell through a hole in the ceiling. Then another shingle. Then a piece of wood from the roof itself. A massive hand pushed through the hole, fingers groping around like a blind person trying to find something. The hand was covered in the same dark hair as the rest of the creature, but the palm was lighter, almost pink. The fingers were easily twice as long as human fingers, with thick black nails that looked like claws. One of the kids screamed. The hand jerked toward the sound, then withdrew. The hole in the roof got bigger. More pieces fell through. Then we could see an eye looking down at us through the opening. That eye was the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen. It was brown, like a human eye, but bigger. And it was intelligent. It looked at each of us in turn, studying us, learning our faces. Then it focused on the children. The creature on the roof made that almost speech sound again, but this time it sounded different, softer, like it was trying to calm them down. That's when I realized something that made my blood run cold. This thing wasn't just intelligent. It understood us. It knew we were a family. It could tell the adults from the children. And for some reason, it was more interested in the kids than in us. "Why is it looking at the children like that?" Sarah whispered. I didn't have an answer, but whatever the reason, I knew we were running out of time. The hole in the roof was getting bigger, and night was falling. Soon it would be dark outside, and something told me that darkness was when this thing was most dangerous. I had to get these people out of here before it was too late. The creature pulled its head back from the hole, but we could still hear it moving around on the roof. It was pacing back and forth, like it was thinking. "We have to get out of here," I said. "Once it gets dark, we're sitting ducks." "How?" Jake asked. "That thing's right on top of us." I looked around the room. 12 people, including kids as young as 6. The trucks were parked out front about 50 yards from the lodge. If we could make it to the vehicles, we might have a chance. "Here's the plan," I said. "Sam, Tom, you take the family to the trucks, fast as you can. Patricia and I will provide cover." "What kind of cover?" Tom asked. "You saw what happened to the tranquilizer." I picked up one of Jake's hunting rifles. "We'll figure something out." That's when the creature on the roof made a new sound. It was like a howl, but with a pattern to it. Long, short, long, long, short. It was calling something. An answer came from across the lake. Same pattern, but different voice. Then another answer from the woods behind the lodge, and another from the direction of the road. "How many of them are there?" Patricia whispered. Before I could answer, the scratching on the roof stopped. The creature had gone quiet. "Where did it go?" Jake asked. I motioned for everyone to stay quiet and listen. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then I heard something that made my heart sink. Car doors slamming. Our trucks. I ran to the front window and looked out. The creature was standing next to my truck, examining it like a mechanic would. As I watched, it reached under the hood and pulled out what looked like spark plug wires. Then it moved to Sam's truck and did the same thin. "Gee, it disabled the vehicles," I said. "How does it know how to do that?" Sam asked. "Good question. Bears don't understand internal combustion engines. This thing did." The creature finished with the trucks and looked directly at the window where I was standing. It held up the spark plug wires like a trophy, then threw them into the lake. We were trapped. That's when I heard the voices. At first I thought it was more of the creatures calling to each other, but these were human voices coming from the direction of the road. Men shouting to each other, the sound of truck engines. "Sounds like help," Tom said. I wasn't so sure. I recognized some of those voices. Local men from town, the kind who'd been drinking in bars and telling Bigfoot stories for 20 years. The kind who'd jump at the chance to hunt something exotic. "They're armed," Patricia said, pointing out the window. She was right. I could see the headlights now, at least 6 trucks coming down the logging road. Men with rifles in the back, spotlight on top of one truck sweeping the trees. The creature by our trucks heard them too. It turned toward the approaching lights and made that howling sound again. This time the answer came from very close by. Another creature stepped out of the woods. This one was smaller than the first, maybe 8 feet tall instead of 9. But it moved with the same intelligent purpose. 2 of them, Jake said. "At least 2, I corrected. The trucks from town pulled into the clearing and spread out in a rough circle. Men jumped out, rifles ready. I recognized most of them. Local hunters and troublemakers, led by a man named Carl Brewster, who'd been talking about hunting the Fook monster for as long as I'd known him. "We know you're out there," Carl shouted into the darkness. "Come on out and we'll make it quick." One of the creatures stepped into the beam of a spotlight. Instead of running or hiding, it stood there and let them see it clearly. The men with the guns went silent. Even from a distance, I could see they were impressed by the size of the thing. This wasn't what they'd expected. "Jesus," one of them said. "Look at the size of that thing." Carl raised his rifle. "Don't matter how big it is, still gonna die." That's when everything went wrong. The creature didn't run when Carl aimed at it. Instead, it charged. It covered the 100 yards between the tree line and the trucks in about 10 seconds. Carl got off one shot, but the creature barely slowed down. It hit Carl like a freight train, picked him up, and threw him 30 feet into a tree. The other men started shooting, but the creature was moving too fast. It jumped from one truck to another, ripping off doors and smashing windows. The men scattered, running for the woods. That's when the second creature appeared, and a third, and a fourth. We were watching a coordinated attack. The creatures had waited for the hunters to get out of their vehicles, then surrounded them. It was military tactics, like something you'd see in a war movie. "They're not just animals," Patricia said. "They're intelligent, really intelligent." One of the hunters ran toward the lodge, a creature right behind him. I opened the door and pulled him inside just as massive claws raked the air where his head had been. The man was young, maybe 20, and scared out of his mind. "They came out of nowhere," he gasped. "There's at least 6 of them, maybe more." Through the windows we could see the battle raging outside. The creatures were systematically destroying the trucks, making sure none of the hunters could escape. But they weren't killing the men. They were hurting them, driving them toward the lake. "Why aren't they killing them?" Jake asked. I was wondering the same thing. These creatures were strong enough to tear a man in half, but they were being careful not to seriously hurt anyone. It was like they were making a point. One of the creatures appeared at our front window. It looked throat. The glass at all of us then did something I'll never forget. It tapped on the window. 3 short taps, 3 long taps, 3 short taps. SOS in Morse code. "It's trying to communicate," I said. The creature tapped again, then pointed at the chaos outside. Then it pointed at us and shook its head. The message was clear. We're not the enemy. They are. I made a decision that probably saved all our lives. I opened the front door and stepped outside. "Robert, don't," Patricia said. But I had to try. If these things were intelligent enough to use Morse code, maybe they were intelligent enough to negotiate. The creature was standing 10 feet away from me. Up close, it was even more impressive. The muscles under that dark hair looked like steel cables. The hands could probably crush my skull like an egg. But the eyes were calm. I held up my hands to show I wasn't armed. The creature nodded, actually nodded, and stepped closer. It made that almost speech sound again, but this time I caught something familiar in it. It sounded like, "No hurt." "No hurt," I repeated. The creature nodded again, then pointed at the lodge. "No hurt." It was promising not to harm us. I pointed at the hunters, who were still running around the clearing being herded by the other creatures. "No hurt them?" The creature considered this, then made a different sound. This one sounded like, "They hurt." I understood. The hunters had come here to kill. The creatures were defending themselves. "If they stop shooting, will you let them go?" The conversation was bizarre, but it was working. The creature thought about my question, then made a sound I interpreted as, "Maybe." I turned toward the chaos and shouted, "Carl, stop shooting! They don't want to hurt you!" "Go to hell, Thornfield!" Carl yelled back, firing another shot at one of the creatures. "I'm going to kill every last one of these things." The creature beside me heard that, and its expression changed. The calm look turned to anger, and it bared those massive teeth. I realized that Carl had just signed his own death warrant. What happened next changed everything I thought I knew about the natural world. The creature beside me made a sound, not the almost speech it had been using with me, but something else. A complex series of howls and roars that carried information I couldn't understand but could feel in my bones. The other creatures stopped hurting the hunters and turned toward Carl. There were 5 of them that I could see, maybe more in the shadows. They formed a circle around him, cutting off any chance of escape. Carl raised his rifle, but before he could fire, one of the creatures moved faster than anything that Big should be able to move. It plucked the gun from his hands and crushed it like a beer can. Then they picked him up. I thought they were going to kill him, but instead they carried him to the edge of the lake and set him down at the water's edge. The largest creature, the one I'd first encountered, bent down and made those almost speech sounds at Carl. Carl was crying now, begging for his life. The creature listened, then made a decision. It pointed at Carl, then at the road leading out of the forest. The message was clear. "Leave. Now. Don't come back." Carl didn't need to be told twice. He ran for the road, leaving his friends and his trucks behind. The other hunters got the message. One by one, they dropped their weapons and backed away. The creatures let them go, but made sure they understood the terms. This was their territory now. Humans were welcome, as long as they came in peace. The creature that had been talking to me turned back to the lodge. It looked at my family, because that's what they were, my family, and made that "no hurt" sound again. Then it did something that still gives me chills when I think about it. It walked over to our disabled trucks, reached into its mouth, and pulled out the spark plug wires it had removed earlier. It had kept them safe, like it knew we'd need them later. It handed me the wires, then stepped back. I understood. We were free to go. But there were conditions. Over the next few minutes, using a combination of gestures, sounds, and what I can only call primitive language, we worked out an agreement. The creatures would claim the deep forest as their territory. Humans could visit the outer areas, but not with guns, not to hunt, and never in large groups. In return, they would protect the forest from poachers and developers. They would be its guardians. Before we left, the largest creature did one more thing. It brought its family out of the woods. There was a female, smaller than the male but still massive, and a young one, maybe 4 feet tall, covered in lighter brown hair. A family, just like ours. The young one was curious about our children. It came closer than the adults, making soft sounds that almost sounded like laughter. One of Jake's kids, a 6-year-old named Tommy, wasn't afraid. He waved at the young creature. The young creature waved back. "They're not monsters," Sarah said quietly. "They're just different." I nodded. That's exactly what they were. Different, but not evil. Intelligent, but not human. Powerful, but not cruel. We fixed our trucks and left the forest that night, but the story didn't end there. I submitted a report to my supervisors, but it was classified immediately. The area around Jake's Lodge was declared a wildlife preserve with restricted access. Officially, there was nothing unusual about it, but unofficially I was assigned a new position. Forest liaison, they called it. My job was to monitor the boundary between human and creature territory to make sure the agreement held. It has, mostly. There have been a few incidents over the years, hunters who ignored the warnings, developers who tried to build too close to the deep woods. But the creatures have kept their word. They protect their territory, but they don't hurt anyone who respects the boundaries. Scientists have been allowed in for limited studies. The creatures seem to understand that some humans are genuinely curious rather than threatening. They've learned things that would revolutionize our understanding of evolution and intelligence. But the research is classified. The local community has changed too. Word got around about what really happened that night, despite the official secrecy. Now the area gets a different kind of tourist. People who come hoping for a glimpse of something extraordinary, but who understand they're visitors in someone else's home. Jake rebuilt his lodge, but he built it outside the creature's territory. He still gets visitors, but now they come with cameras instead of guns. As for me, I'm still out here, still monitoring, still learning. Sometimes, on quiet nights when I'm patrolling the boundary, I hear them calling to each other across the forest. Complex sounds that carry information I'm only beginning to understand. They're not just surviving out there, they're thriving, building something that might be called civilization. And sometimes, when I'm very lucky, I catch a glimpse of them at the edge of the deep woods. The young one from that first night is grown now, nearly as big as its parents. It has young ones of its own. They watch me watching them. And I think they remember that night when everything changed, when two different kinds of people learned to share the same forest. The Fook monster isn't a monster at all. It's our neighbor, and it's been waiting a very long time for us to be ready to say hello. I still don't know if we are ready, but I know they're willing to wait. After all, they've been here a lot longer than we have. My name is Samuel Creekwater, and I've been a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for 12 years. Half Cherokee, half Irish, I grew up hearing the old stories from my grandmother. Stories about things that lived in these mountains long before the tourists came. Stories I never really believed until October of 1969. The Smokies cover over 500,000 acres across Tennessee and North Carolina. These are the highest peaks in the eastern United States, and they've been Cherokee homeland for thousands of years. My job isn't just keeping hikers safe. I run cultural programs teaching visitors about Cherokee history and traditions. It's work I love, connecting people to this sacred land. That autumn was different from the start. The leaves turned earlier than usual, brilliant reds and golds that took your breath away. But there was something else in the air, something that made the hair on your arms stand up when you walked the back trails alone. The animals were acting strange too. Deer avoiding certain areas, birds going quiet in spots where they used to sing. My grandmother, Mary Creekwater, was 83 and knew more Cherokee lore than anyone alive. She'd been visiting me that week, helping with a cultural education program for a group of college students. 20 kids from the University of Tennessee, eager to learn about Native American traditions. Something's not right in these mountains, she told me on the third day, stirring her coffee with a wooden spoon she'd carried for 50 years. The balance is broken somewhere, I laughed it off. Probably just the weather changing, Grandma. You know how the mountains get in fall. But she shook her head, her dark eyes serious. No, grandson. This is different. Something sacred has been disturbed. The first real sign of trouble came on October 15th. A group of backpackers stumbled into the ranger station around sunset, shaken and babbling about a mountain lion that walked like a man. The leader, a guy named Mike Patterson from Knoxville, could barely hold his coffee cup steady. It was huge, he kept saying. Bigger than any cat I've ever seen. But it stood up on two legs and looked right at us. Those eyes, they weren't animal eyes. They were human. I wrote up the report like always, but I wasn't too worried. People see all kinds of things in the mountains, especially when they're tired and scared. Black bears can look pretty strange when they rear up on their hind legs. But then Patterson said something that made my blood run cold. It was near those old Cherokee sites you told us about yesterday, the ceremonial grounds up on Thunderhead Mountain. The thing was just standing there, like it was guarding something. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what my grandmother had said about sacred things being disturbed. The Thunderhead area was off limits to the public, too remote and dangerous for casual hikers. But it was also one of the most sacred Cherokee sites in the entire park, where women had held special ceremonies for hundreds of years. The next morning, I hiked up to Thunderhead alone. It was a 6-hour climb through thick forest, following deer trails that most people would never find. The October air was crisp and clean, but as I got higher, something felt wrong. The normal sounds of the forest, birds, insects, small animals moving through the underbrush, gradually faded to nothing. When I reached the ceremonial grounds, I understood why. Someone had been digging. The sacred circle where Cherokee women had performed their most important rituals was torn up like a construction site. Fresh dirt was piled everywhere, and I could see holes where artifacts had been pulled from the ground. Ancient stones that had stood in perfect alignment for centuries were knocked over or missing completely. I felt sick. This was more than vandalism, it was desecration of the worst kind. Federal law protected these sites, but more than that, this place was holy to my people. Whoever had done this didn't just break the law, they'd violated something much deeper. I was taking pictures for evidence when I heard it. A low, growling sound, but not quite like any animal I knew. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing off the mountain peaks. I froze, camera in hand, listening. Then I saw the tracks. They were pressed deep into the soft earth near the dig site. Paw prints bigger than my hand, but wrong somehow. The claws were too long, and there was something that looked almost like a thumb. Worse, the prints showed a walking pattern that no four-legged animal could make. Whatever had made these tracks walked upright. I followed the trail for maybe 50 yards before it disappeared onto solid rock. But near the last clear print, I found something that made me drop my camera. A piece of torn fabric caught on a thorn bush. It was old cloth, hand-woven in the Cherokee way, dyed with natural colors that had faded to deep browns and reds. The pattern was one I recognized from my grandmother's stories, a design that only Cherokee women wore during certain sacred ceremonies. But the cloth was fresh, recently torn. I grabbed the fabric and my camera and headed down the mountain as fast as I could safely move. By the time I reached the ranger station, it was getting dark, and my grandmother was waiting for me with a pot of stew and a worried expression. "You found it," she said, looking at my face. It wasn't a question. I told her everything. The disturbed ceremonial ground, the strange tracks, the piece of Cherokee cloth. She listened without interrupting, her weathered hands folded in her lap. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Finally, she spoke in Cherokee, words I only half understood. Then she switched to English. "The Wampus Cat is awake." I'd heard the story 100 times growing up. A Cherokee woman who brought the rules, who spied on men's sacred ceremonies. The spirits cursed her, trapping her between human and animal form, making her a creature of vengeance and sorrow. But it was just a story, a way to teach children about respecting traditions. "Grandma, you don't really believe..." She held up her hand, stopping me. "Someone has stolen the sacred women's items. The balance between male and female, human and animal, earth and spirit, it's all broken now. She has no choice but to hunt." That night, I barely slept. Every sound outside my cabin made me jump. Wind in the trees, an owl calling, a branch scraping against my roof. Around 3 in the morning, I heard something that definitely wasn't natural. Footsteps, heavy ones, circling my cabin. I crept to the window and looked out. In the moonlight, I could see prints in the soft earth around my porch, the same impossible tracks I'd found on the mountain. Whatever had made them was gone by morning, but the message was clear. I was being watched. The next few days brought a steady stream of strange reports. Campers found their tents slashed, but nothing stolen. Hikers heard footsteps following them on remote trails, but never saw what was making the sounds. Most disturbing, several people claimed to see a woman in traditional Cherokee dress walking through the forest, only to have her vanish when they called out. Then Dr. Marcus Stone showed up at my office. Stone was an archaeologist from Vanderbilt University, the kind of academic who thought he knew everything about Native American culture from reading books. He was tall and thin, with expensive hiking gear that looked like it had never been used. His permit paperwork was perfect, but something about him rubbed me wrong from the start. "I'm researching Cherokee ceremonial practices," he told me, spreading maps across my desk. "Specifically, the role of women in pre-contact and religious traditions. I have permission to survey several sites in the backcountry." I looked over his permits. They were legitimate, signed by the right people in Washington, but they didn't give him permission to dig, only to document and photograph existing features. "You understand these are sacred sites," I told him. "My people still consider them holy ground. You need to treat them with respect." Stone smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, Ranger Creekwater. I'm well aware of the cultural sensitivities involved. This is purely academic research." Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. I assigned him a backcountry camping permit for the Thunderhead area, figuring I could keep an eye on him. But the next day, when I hiked up to check on his work, his campsite was empty. Fresh digging tools were scattered around, and there were new holes in the sacred ground. Dr. Stone was nowhere to be found. That evening, one of his graduate students, Kevin Burns, came running into the ranger station. The kid was maybe 22, covered in dirt and shaking like a leaf. "Something happened to Dr. Stone," he gasped. "He went out this morning to work on the dig site, and when he didn't come back by dark, we went looking for him. We found his equipment, but no sign of him anywhere." I organized a search party for first light, but something told me we were already too late. We found Dr. Stone at dawn, and I'll never forget what I saw. He was lying in the center of the Cherokee ceremonial circle, positioned with his head pointing east toward the rising sun. That was traditional Cherokee burial positioning, something no outsider should have known. But Stone wasn't dead. He was worse than dead. The man was alive but completely catatonic, staring at the sky with eyes that didn't see anything. His hair had gone completely white overnight, and his hands were scratched and bloody, like he'd been clawing at something. When the paramedics finally got him to respond, all he could say was the same phrase over and over in perfect Cherokee. "She sees all. She knows all. She remembers all." My grandmother translated it for me later, but I already knew what it meant. The Wampus cat had found her first victim. That night, Kevin Burns disappeared from his tent. We found him the next morning, arranged the same way Dr. Stone had been, head pointing east, eyes staring at nothing, hair gone white with terror. But Burns was able to tell us what he'd seen before his mind snapped completely. "She came to me in the dark," he whispered to the paramedics. "A Cherokee woman in traditional dress. But her eyes were yellow like a cat's. She spoke to me in a language I don't understand, but somehow I knew what she was saying. She was asking about the things Dr. Stone stole, the sacred women's items he took from the ceremonial ground." "What things?" I asked. Burns' eyes focused on me for just a moment. "Masks," he said. "Sacred masks and ceremonial tools. He has them hidden in his tent. She wants them back." We searched Stone's camp and found exactly what Burns described, ancient Cherokee artifacts that had been carefully cleaned and cataloged. Ceremonial masks carved from sacred wood, ritual tools made from stone and bone, items that had been buried in the women's sacred ground for protection. Stone had stolen the most powerful and sacred objects of Cherokee women's spiritual practice. That's when my grandmother explained the real danger we were facing. "The Wampus cat isn't just protecting the sacred sites," she told me. "These particular items hold the spiritual essence of Cherokee women's power. They control the balance between the physical and spirit worlds. When they were stolen by men who don't understand their purpose, it broke protective barriers that have stood for centuries. What does that mean for us? She looked toward the mountains, her old eyes sad and frightened. It means she's not going to stop until the balance is restored. And she won't just be hunting the thieves anymore. She'll be hunting anyone she sees as a threat to the sacred feminine mysteries. As if to prove her point, that night we got reports of a large cat-like creature attacking every male camper in a 10-mile radius. Women were left alone, but men were stalked, terrorized, and driven from the mountains by something that seemed to know their exact location no matter where they tried to hide. The Wampus cat was no longer just protecting her territory. She was at war. 3 more members of Stone's archaeological team vanished over the next 2 days. Each time we found them the same way, positioned in traditional Cherokee burial arrangement, hair white with terror, minds broken by whatever they'd experienced. The survivors could only babble about a woman who changed into a mountain lion, who spoke an ancient Cherokee, who knew their names and their crimes. I was preparing for another search when she came to me directly. I was alone in my cabin, going over maps and trying to figure out how to stop the attacks, when I heard a soft knock at my door. When I opened it, a Cherokee woman was standing on my porch. She was beautiful in the way of the old photographs. High cheekbones, long black hair braided with traditional beads, wearing a dress of hand-woven cloth dyed in the sacred colors. But her eyes were the amber yellow of a mountain lion, and they held a sadness deeper than any human should carry. "Samuel Creekwater," she said in Cherokee, her voice like wind through pine needles. "Grandson of Mary Creekwater. You know who I am." I could barely speak. "You're the Wampus cat." She nodded. "I was Ayanna, daughter of the Wolf Clan, keeper of the women's sacred mysteries. That was 200 years ago. Now I am something else, guardian of what your people call holy, prisoner of a curse I cannot break." "The men who stole from the ceremonial ground violated laws older than your nation," she finished. "They took items that control the boundary between life and death, between the physical world and the spirit realm. In the hands of those who don't understand their power, these artifacts are dangerous beyond your imagination." I invited her inside, and she moved with the fluid grace of a wild animal, never taking those strange eyes off me. When she sat at my kitchen table, I could see the subtle changes in her form. Fingernails that were too long and sharp, canine teeth that extended just past her lips, muscles that moved with more than human strength. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because you carry Cherokee blood, and because your grandmother is a keeper of the old ways. You can understand what must be done." She leaned forward, and I caught the scent of pine and wild earth. "The stolen artifacts must be returned to their sacred resting place, blessed by Cherokee women who know the proper ceremonies. Until that happens, I cannot rest. I cannot stop hunting." "What about Dr. Stone's team? The people you've already—" I couldn't finish the sentence. Her expression softened slightly. "I have not killed them. Death would be mercy compared to what they experienced. They violated the most sacred laws of my people, so I showed them the price of that violation. They will live, but they will never forget what they saw." A sound outside made her head snap up, and suddenly she was different, more animal than human, muscles tensed for violence. "More of them come," she said. "The leader, Stone. He thinks he can retrieve his stolen treasures." Through my window, I could see flashlight beams moving through the trees. Dr. Stone had recovered enough to return, and he'd brought help, armed men who clearly weren't park rangers or archaeologists. "He doesn't understand," Ayanna said, rising from her chair. As she stood, her human form began to shift and blur. "He thinks this is about money or academic reputation. He cannot comprehend that he has awakened forces beyond his power to control." "Wait," I said. "There has to be another way." But she was already changing, her beautiful human form flowing like water into something else. In seconds, a massive mountain lion stood in my kitchen, easily twice the size of any natural cat. But the yellow eyes remained intelligent, unmistakably human in their awareness. She padded to the door, then looked back at me with an expression that somehow conveyed both sadness and determination. When she spoke, it was in a voice that combined human speech with the rumbling growl of a large predator. "Tell your grandmother to prepare the cleansing ceremony. If the sacred items are returned and properly blessed before dawn, this can end peacefully. If not," she bared fangs longer than my fingers, "I will do what I was cursed to do." Then she was gone, flowing into the darkness like smoke. I called my grandmother immediately, explaining what Ayanna had told me. While she gathered the materials for a traditional cleansing ceremony, I headed into the forest to find Dr. Stone. I found him all right, along with 4 armed men who looked like mercenaries rather than academics. They were at the original dig site, using floodlights to illuminate their work as they searched for the hidden artifacts. "Dr. Stone," I called out, stepping into their light, "we need to talk." He spun around, and I was shocked by what I saw. The academic I'd met a week ago was gone, replaced by a man who looked like he'd aged 20 years in 7 days. His hair was streaked with gray, his face was gaunt and haggard, and his eyes held the fevered intensity of someone on the edge of madness. "Ranger Creekwater," he said, his voice hoarse. "Perfect timing. You can help us find what that thing took from my camp. Those artifacts don't belong to you, Dr. Stone. They're sacred to the Cherokee people, and taking them was both illegal and—" "Sacred?" He laughed, and it was an ugly sound. "These are priceless archaeological specimens, probably the most important Cherokee artifacts ever discovered. Do you have any idea of what they're worth to museums and collectors?" So that was it. This had never been about academic research. Stone was an artifact thief, planning to sell Cherokee sacred objects to the highest bidder. "You need to return those items to where you found them," I said, "right now, before—" A scream from one of his men cut me off. The mercenary was pointing at the tree line, his rifle shaking in his hands. "There," he whispered. "Do you see it?" In the shadows between the trees, a pair of yellow eyes reflected the floodlights. As we watched, a figure stepped into the light. The Cherokee woman I'd spoken with, but now her transformation was complete. She retained her human intelligence and speech, but her body was that of a massive mountain lion, moving with predatory grace that made every man in the clearing take a step backward. "Marcus Stone," she spoke, her voice carrying clearly across the distance. "You have 3 minutes to return what you stole, or face the consequences of your violation." Stone raised a pistol with shaking hands. "Stay back. I know what you are. Some kind of Cherokee shapeshifter, probably using drugs to create hallucinations. It won't work on me." The Wampus cat tilted her head, almost like she was curious about his denial of what he was clearly seeing. "You still don't understand," she said sadly. "This isn't about threats or fear, Dr. Stone. This is about balance, about justice, about powers older than your civilization." Then she began to change again, and this time the transformation was something out of a nightmare. Her form seemed to shift and flow between human and animal, sometimes both at once, as if the laws of nature no longer applied to her. She grew larger, more massive, until she towered over us like something from ancient legends. 2 minutes, she said, and her voice now carried the rumble of an avalanche. Dr. Stone broke first. Screaming incoherently, he ran to his tent and began throwing out the stolen artifacts, sacred masks, ceremonial tools, carved totems that had rested in Cherokee holy ground for centuries. His mercenaries had already fled, crashing through the underbrush in panic. I helped gather the scattered artifacts while the Wampus cat watched, her massive form slowly shrinking back to something closer to natural mountain lion size. When the last sacred item was collected, my grandmother emerged from the forest, carrying the materials she needed for the cleansing ceremony. What happened next was the most sacred thing I've ever witnessed. My grandmother and Ayanna performed a traditional Cherokee ceremony that had been passed down through generations of women, singing in the old language while sage smoke rose toward the stars. The stolen artifacts were purified, blessed, and returned to their proper resting places in the ceremonial ground. As the ceremony concluded, I watched the Wampus cat transform one final time. The massive predator form faded away, leaving only Ayanna, still recognizably the cursed Cherokee woman, but somehow more at peace than when I'd first seen her. "It is finished," she said to my grandmother in Cherokee. Then, in English to me, "The balance is restored. The sacred mysteries are protected once again." "What happens now?" I asked. She smiled, and for the first time it reached her strange yellow eyes. "Now I return to my vigil. I will guard these sacred places as I have for 2 centuries, but as protector rather than avenger. Those who approach with respect will find me a guardian. Those who come to violate or steal," she shrugged, "they will find me something else entirely." Dr. Stone was arrested by federal marshals the next morning, charged with theft of cultural artifacts from federal land. His academic career was over, and he spent the next several years in federal prison. The members of his team who had been touched by the Wampus cat recovered physically, but none of them ever spoke publicly about what they'd experienced in the mound. Taines. I was promoted to head of Cherokee cultural programs for the entire park system, working directly with tribal elders to ensure that sacred sites received proper protection and respect. The ceremonial ground on Thunderhead Mountain was designated as off-limits to all but traditional Cherokee ceremonies, with enhanced security measures that few people understood the true purpose of. My grandmother lived 3 more years, long enough to see the sacred sites properly protected and the old traditions honored. Before she died, she told me something that I've never shared with anyone else. "Ayanna is not the only guardian in these mountains," she said. "The Cherokee people have always known that some things are too important to leave to human protection alone. The spirits of the land itself watch over what is sacred." I still work in the Great Smoky Mountains, 25 years later. I've never seen the Wampus cat again, but I know she's there. Sometimes hikers report glimpsing a large mountain lion watching them from ridgelines. Others claim to see a Cherokee woman in traditional dress walking the forest paths at dawn or dusk. I always tell them the same thing. If you see her, show respect. Thank her for protecting these mountains. And remember that some places, some things, are sacred to people who lived here long before you arrived. Because the Wampus cat is still out there, still standing guard over the mysteries of her people, and as long as there are those who would violate or steal what is sacred, she always will be. The mountains remember everything, and they protect what needs protecting, no matter how long it takes. My name is Elizabeth Fairchild, and I used to be a veterinarian before I became a park ranger. I thought I'd seen everything when it came to animals: sick cattle, injured dogs, the occasional bear attack. But nothing in my 8 years working the Blue Ridge Parkway prepared me for what I found that cold November morning in 1991. The call came in just after sunrise. Tom Henderson, a local farmer whose land backed up to the parkway, was nearly crying on the radio. "Liz, you need to get out here. Something killed 3 of my best cattle, but this ain't like anything I've ever seen." I grabbed my ranger gear and headed out in the truck. The Blue Ridge Parkway stretches 469 miles through the Appalachian Mountains, connecting 2 national parks. Most folks see it as a scenic drive, all pretty views and fall colors. But I know the real mountains, the deep woods where cell phones don't work and you can go 40 miles without seeing another soul. The November air bit at my face as I pulled up to Tom's farm. He was waiting by his fence, looking pale. Tom was a tough mountain man who'd farmed these hills for 30 years. If something had him spooked, it was serious. "They're over here," he said, leading me into his pasture. "Found them this morning when I went to check the herd." What I saw made my stomach turn. 3 full-grown cattle lay in a neat line about 20 feet apart. But these weren't normal kills. The bite marks were huge, way too big for any wolf or dog I knew. The wounds were clean, surgical almost, like whatever did this knew exactly where to bite for a quick kill. "Tom, have you seen any large dogs around? Maybe a pack of wild ones?" He shook his head. "Liz, I found tracks. You need to see them." He led me to a muddy patch near the creek. There in the soft earth were paw prints unlike anything in my veterinary textbooks. They were massive, bigger than my hand, but what made my skin crawl was the shape. They looked almost human at the heel, like whatever made them could walk on two legs if it wanted to. "There's something else," Tom said quietly. "Yesterday evening, just before dark, I was fixing the fence over yonder. I heard this sound, like a wolf howling but deeper, louder. And when I looked up, I swear I saw something standing at the edge of those trees. Something big. It was watching me. I measured the tracks and took photos, trying to stay professional, but my hands were shaking. In all my years studying animal behavior, I'd never seen anything like this. Tom, I want you to keep your livestock close to the house for now, and if you see or hear anything strange, you call me right away." As I drove back to the ranger station, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The mountain forest felt different somehow, quieter, like even the birds were afraid to make noise. That night, I dug through old reports and local history books. The mountains had stories going back generations. German settlers talked about something they called a warg, a giant wolf that walked like a man. The Monacan tribes had legends of the Great Wolf, a guardian spirit that protected the mountains from invaders. Even Civil War records mention soldiers reporting devil dogs following the armies. I'd always figured these were just stories, ways for people to explain things they didn't understand. Bears seen at a distance maybe, or wolves that had grown in size with each telling. But those tracks were real. And so were Tom's dead cattle. The attacks kept coming. Over the next week, I got calls from 3 more farms. Each time it was the same story. Cattle killed with surgical precision, massive tracks, and that feeling of being watched from the woods. I started carrying a rifle in my truck. Park Service didn't usually arm rangers for wildlife, if calls, but something about these kills felt different, dangerous. The breakthrough came when Sarah Mitchell called from her farm near milepost 78. Her voice was tight with fear. "Ranger, Fairchild had got my bull. Big Red, he was 200 pounds if he was an ounce. Whatever did this dragged him a quarter mile into the woods. I found the drag marks leading into the forest. Following them felt like the stupidest thing I'd ever done, but I had to know what we were dealing with. The trail led deep into the woods where the trees grew so thick that noon felt like twilight. That's when I found the feeding site. Big Red lay in a small clearing, but he wasn't just killed, he was arranged. The body was positioned facing east, legs straight, head raised like he was sleeping. Around him, smaller bones were laid out in a perfect circle. Rabbit bones, deer bones, even what looked like dog bones. This wasn't random predator behavior. This was intelligent, deliberate. I was taking photos when I heard it. A low rumble from the trees around me. Not quite a growl, not quite a howl. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once. My hands froze on the camera. Every animal instinct I had was screaming at me to run, but I forced myself to look up, scanning the tree line. That's when I saw the eyes. Yellow eyes, bright as headlights, watching me from maybe 50 yards away. They were too high up to belong to any normal wolf. Had to be 6 feet off the ground. And they held intelligence. Not the simple awareness of an animal, but the calculating gaze of something that understood exactly what it was looking at. "Easy," I whispered, more to myself than to whatever was watching. I slowly reached for my rifle, never breaking eye contact. The eyes tilted, like the head was cocking to one side, curious. Then, without a sound, they disappeared. I waited 10 minutes before I dared to move. When I finally made it back to my truck, my hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. That night I called my old professor from veterinary school, Dr. Marcus Webb. He listened. "Tend to my description of the tracks and kills without interrupting." "Elizabeth," he said finally, "what you're describing doesn't match any known North American canine. The jaw strength alone would have to be incredible. We're talking about something that could crush bone like we break crackers. So what am I dealing with?" There was a long pause. "I don't know. But whatever it is, it's not natural. And if it's showing organized behavior, the ritual arrangements, the territory marking, then it's far more dangerous than any normal predator. 3 days later, the thing made its first direct contact with humans. Martin Rodriguez was a day hiker from Richmond, doing a solo trek on one of the parkway's remote trails. When he didn't check in with his wife that evening, she called park services. I found his campsite the next morning. The tent was shredded, but not randomly. The cuts were precise, methodical. His backpack was untouched, food still sealed inside. His water bottles were lined up in a neat row, and Martin was nowhere to be found. We called in search teams, helicopters, the works. It was Sarah Mitchell who found him, or what was left of him, 3 days later. Martin's body was arranged just like the cattle, lying peacefully, facing east, arms at his sides. But the worst part was his face. It wasn't torn up like you'd expect from an animal attack. It was calm, like he'd gone to sleep and never woken up. The medical examiner found massive trauma to the neck. Something with huge teeth had killed him instantly. But there were other marks too. Claw marks that looked almost like symbols carved into nearby trees. A circle of stones around the body. This wasn't just a predator killing for food. This was something else entirely. That night I sat in my ranger station with all the lights on and my rifle across my lap. Outside, the November wind howled through the mountains. But underneath that wind, I heard something else. Howling. Deep and long and impossibly loud. It echoed off the mountains like thunder, lasting far longer than any normal wolf could sustain, and it was getting closer. The howling came every night for a week, not random calls, but patterns. Long howls answered by shorter ones, like some kind of conversation happening in the darkness around my station. I wasn't sleeping much. Every sound made me jump. Branches falling, the wind rattling the windows, even my own radio crackling to life. The isolation that I'd always loved about this job now felt like a trap. Then the tourists started reporting sightings. A family camping at Rocky Knob called in hysterical. They'd been sitting around their campfire when something massive walked through their camp on 2 legs. It was like a werewolf, the father kept saying. 7 feet tall, covered in black fur, but it walked upright like a person. The thing had circled their RV 3 times, then grabbed their German shepherd. The dog never even had time to bark. I interviewed them the next morning. The whole family was packed and ready to leave, but they were coherent, credible. The mother, a nurse from Charlottesville, sketched what she'd seen. It looked exactly like what I'd been imagining from the tracks and eyewitness reports. It wasn't just big, she said. It was smart. When my husband turned on the RV's floodlights, the thing didn't run. It just stood there studying us, like it was figuring us out. More reports came in. A trucker on the parkway said something ran alongside his rig at 60 miles per hour, keeping pace for 2 miles before disappearing into the forest. A park maintenance crew found their equipment moved overnight, not stolen, but rearranged in precise patterns. I started mapping the incidents. They followed the parkway corridor for about 50 miles, always staying within a few miles of the road. It was like whatever these things were, they were using the highway as their territory boundary. Things were multiple creatures working together. That's when I realized I wasn't dealing with just one creature. The howling patterns were coordination calls. The tracks showed different sizes, a big one maybe 400 pounds and several smaller ones. The attacks were coordinated, with some creatures driving prey toward others waiting in ambush. I was dealing with a pack. The worst part was how they seemed to be learning about us. After the RV incident, they started showing interest in vehicles. Tire marks in the mud showed something heavy walking around parked cars. Deep claw marks scored the paint on a ranger truck left overnight at a trailhead. They were studying us the same way I was studying them. I called the state wildlife office, but they thought I was losing it. Wolves don't behave that way, Elizabeth. You're probably dealing with a few large dogs gone feral. Set some traps, dart them, and relocate them somewhere else. But I knew better. These weren't dogs, and they were getting bolder. The night everything changed, I was doing a late patrol near milepost 85. It was past midnight, snow starting to fall, and I was thinking about heading back to the station when my headlights caught something on the road ahead. A massive black shape was standing right in the middle of the parkway. I stopped the truck about 100 yards away and grabbed my spotlight. When the beam hit it, I saw the creature clearly for the first time. It was enormous. Had to be 7 feet tall even on all fours. Its fur was black as coal, and its head was the size of a bear's, but shaped like a wolf's. When it turned to look at me, those yellow eyes reflected my light like mirrors. But the thing that made my blood freeze was what it did next. It stood up, rose up on its back legs like a person, towering over 8 feet tall now. Its front paws, hands, hung at its sides, and it just stood there looking at me. Not threatening, not preparing to attack. Just looking. We stared at each other for maybe 30 seconds. Then it did something that nearly made me crash the truck. It raised one massive hand and waved. Not a random gesture. A clear, deliberate wave. Like it was saying hello. Then it dropped back to all fours and vanished into the forest so fast I barely saw it move. I sat there shaking for 10 minutes before I could drive again. When I got back to the station, I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon and tried to make sense of what I'd seen. That thing had recognized me, acknowledged me. Whatever intelligence was behind those yellow eyes, it knew exactly who I was. The next morning, I found huge paw prints in the snow around my ranger station. The creature had been there while I slept, walking around the building, leaving tracks by every window. It had been watching me sleep. That afternoon, I got the call that changed everything. Tom Henderson's voice was tight with terror. "Liz, you need to get out here right now. They got my grandson's school bus." I broke every speed limit getting to Tom's farm. The school bus was sitting sideways across his access road, empty, with the driver's door hanging open. No blood, no signs of struggle, but massive claw marks scored the yellow paint. "Where's Billy?" I asked Tom. His grandson was 8 years old, rode this bus every day from school. "He's safe. Bus driver got the kids out and ran them to my house when those things showed up. But, Liz," Tom pointed toward the tree line, "there's a whole pack of them up there. Been watching us for the last hour." I counted at least 6 pairs of yellow eyes gleaming in the forest shadows. They weren't hiding anymore. They wanted us to see them. "Tom, get Billy and your family into the house and lock the doors. I'm calling for backup." But when I tried my radio, all I got was static. My cell phone showed no signal. They'd cut us off somehow. That's when I heard it, a sound that made my skin crawl. A human voice calling from the woods. "Help. Help me." It sounded like a woman, scared and hurt. Every instinct told me it was a trap, but what if someone was really in trouble? "Stay in the house," I told Tom, then headed toward the forest with my rifle ready. The voice called again, deeper in the woods now. "Please, I'm hurt." But as I got closer, I realized the voice wasn't quite right. The words were human, but underneath them was something else. A rumbling animal undertone, like a recording being played through a broken speaker. I stopped at the tree line. "I'm a park ranger. If you're hurt, come toward my voice." The voice stopped. For a moment, the forest was completely silent. Then the largest creature I'd ever seen stepped out from behind a massive oak tree. It was the one from the road, but standing upright, it looked even more impossible. 8.5 feet tall, covered in thick black fur, with arms like tree trunks and hands that ended in claws longer than my fingers. Its head was a nightmare mix of wolf and something older, more primitive. But its eyes held intelligence that was almost human. When it spoke, its voice was deep as thunder, words carefully formed around teeth designed for tearing flesh. "You are the animal doctor." I nearly dropped my rifle. "You can talk. We remember your kind, the ones who healed the sick beasts long ago." It tilted its massive head. "You study us. We study you." "What are you?" The creature, I couldn't think of it as just an animal anymore, seemed to consider the question. We are what remains, guardians of the deep places. When the old treaties were broken, we slept. Now we wake. Treaties? Your kind spreads like fire, burns the forests, poisons the streams, kills without need. Its yellow eyes narrowed. We were made to stop this. Made. Not born, not evolved. Made. The Native Americans, I said, pieces clicking together. The Monacan stories about the great wolf. The shamans called us for, and when the land was threatened, gave us purpose, intelligence, made us guardians of what should not be touched. The creature's voice carried centuries of sadness. But guardians can become avengers when pushed too far. I understood now. These weren't just mutated wolves or escaped lab animals. They were something far older and more dangerous. Protectors created by desperate people to defend their homeland. The killings, the cattle. We take only what we need, but your people build roads through sacred places. Bring metal beasts that leak poison. Cut down trees older than your civilization. The creature stepped closer, and I fought every instinct not to run. We are patient, but patience has limits. What do you want? Recognition, respect, boundaries that will not be crossed. Its voice dropped to a growl. Or we will make our own boundaries. That's when I heard the helicopters. The creature heard them too, its head snapping up, ears pricked. Through the trees I could see military aircraft approaching, not Park Service, but black helicopters with no markings. Liz, Tom was shouting from his house. There's soldiers coming up the road. The creature's demeanor changed instantly. The almost reasonable intelligence in its eyes was replaced by pure predatory fury. They come to cage us again, it snarled. Make us experiments. Use our blood for their weapons. Again? What do you mean, again? But there was no time for answers. The helicopters were landing and armed soldiers were pouring out. Not Park Service, not local police. These were military, moving with the precision of a special operations team. The creature threw back its massive head and howled, a sound that shook the trees and seemed to come from the earth itself. From all around us, answering howls echoed through the mountains. The pack was coming. You must choose, the creature said, looking down at me with those ancient eyes. Help them cage us, or help us remain free. As soldiers surrounded the area and my radio crackled back to life with military frequencies, I realized this was bigger than just protecting livestock or managing wildlife. This was about the last free things in a world that was running out of wild places. And somehow, I was caught right in the middle of a war that had been building for centuries. The battle lasted less than 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. The creatures moved like shadows made flesh, using the forest terrain with impossible skill. The soldiers had training and technology, but the pack had something more. They were fighting for their home. I made my choice when I saw a soldier raising a tranquilizer rifle toward the alpha. Before I could think about it, I knocked his aim off, sending the dart into a tree trunk. "What the hell, Ranger?" he shouted. "They're not animals," I said. "They're people. Different, but people." The alpha caught my eye and nodded once, acknowledgement and gratitude. Then it let out another howl, and the pack melted back into the forest as quickly as they'd appeared. The military team leader, a colonel whose nameplate read Morrison, was furious. "Those are classified research subjects that escaped from a federal facility. You just interfered with national security." "Funny," I said, "because they told me they were guardians created by Native Americans to protect this land. And they've been here a lot longer than your facility." Morrison's face went pale. "What did you say?" That's when I knew the creature had told me the truth. The government knew exactly what these things were, and they'd been trying to capture or control them for years. The official report classified the entire incident. The military withdrew within hours, and a media blackout covered the whole area. Officially, nothing happened in the Blue Ridge Mountains in November 1991, But I knew better, and so did the local mountain families. Over the following months, we worked out an understanding. The pack would limit their hunting to sick or weak livestock, natural culling that actually helped the herds stay healthy. In return, certain areas of the parkway would be designated as protected wilderness, off-limits to development. The arrangement worked better than anyone expected. Deer overpopulation stopped being a problem. Other predators avoided the area, reducing conflicts with farmers. And though tourists still reported occasional sightings of large wolves, there were no more attacks. I became the unofficial liaison between the pack and the human community. Sometimes I'd find gifts at my ranger station, perfect deer hides, interesting stones, even wildflowers arranged in complex patterns. Messages that I was still welcome in their territory. The Alpha and I met face-to-face only one more time, about 6 months later. I was doing a late evening patrol when I found it waiting by the roadside, standing upright in the moonlight. "The arrangement holds," it said in that deep, careful voice. "Your people keep their word." "Some of them do," I said. "Others still want to study you, capture you. We know. We're always watching." It paused, looking up at the stars. "But for now, there is peace." "Will you ever trust us completely?" The creature considered this for a long moment. "Trust must be earned across generations, not months. But you, animal doctor, you chose to help when you could have helped destroy. This is remembered." It turned to leave, then paused. "The old shamans who made us left instructions. If the treaties hold, if the sacred places remain untouched, we are guardians. If not, those ancient yellow eyes fixed on mine, then we become what we were always capable of being." I never asked what that meant. I didn't want to know. That was over 30 years ago. I'm retired now, but I still live in these mountains. The pack is still here too. I see their tracks sometimes, catch glimpses of yellow eyes in the forest. New stories have grown up around them, passed down through local families. The government hasn't tried to capture them again, at least not openly. So, maybe they learned their lesson. Maybe they're just waiting for a better opportunity. But I sleep well at night, knowing that something wild and fierce and ancient is out there in the darkness, keeping watch over these old mountains. Some boundaries should never be crossed. Some wild things should stay wild. And sometimes, if you listen carefully on cold November nights when the wind howls through the Blue Ridge, you can still hear them calling to each other across the peaks, guardians singing their ancient songs, reminding the world that not everything can be tamed or caged or controlled. The mountains remember, and so do they. My name is Elizabeth Fairchild, and I learned that the most dangerous creatures aren't always the ones we should fear most. Sometimes, they're the ones protecting us from something far worse. My name is Theodore Blackthorne, and I've been a park ranger at Seneca Rocks for 20 years. I've seen a lot of things in these West Virginia mountains that would make most folks nervous. Bear attacks, lightning strikes, climbers who pushed too hard and paid the price. But I never believed in ghost stories. Spent too many nights alone in these mountains during the war to get spooked by wind and shadows. That changed in March 1955 when the Hollow Men came for my son. Seneca Rocks stands 900 feet tall, a knife edge of limestone cutting into the sky. It's been drawing climbers from all over the country since the war ended. Technical stuff, the kind of climbing that separates the weekend warriors from the real deal. I've made more rescues off that rock face than I care to count. The mountain has history, dark history. During the war, there was a German POW camp about 15 miles east. Some of those prisoners tried to escape through these mountains. Most got caught or died trying. The Seneca Indians used to tell stories about shadow people living in the rock itself. Civil War deserters hid in the caves during the 1860s. I always figured that was just talk. Old stories get bigger with each telling. My boy Michael was 16 that spring, tall and lean like his mother. He'd been climbing with me since he could walk, and by that March he was better on the rock than most adults. When his high school started a climbing club, I was the one who taught them the basics. Safety first, I always said. Check your gear twice. Trust your partner. Respect the mountain. The weather that week had been strange. Late winter storms kept rolling through, leaving ice on the north faces even when the sun was shining. Fog banks would appear out of nowhere, thick as cotton, then vanish just as quick. The kind of weather that makes even experienced climbers nervous. On March 15th, Hale's group got permission for an overnight climb. 5 kids total, plus their teacher, Mr. Patterson. They were planning to camp on the ledge system about 400 feet up, then complete the summit the next morning. I checked their gear myself before they left. Everything looked solid. That night, the storm hit harder than the Weather Service predicted. 60-mile-per-hour winds, freezing rain, temperature drop of 30 degrees in 2 hours. I was already putting together a rescue team when the radio crackled to life. "Base, this is Patterson. We need help up here. Something's wrong. Really wrong." His voice was shaking. In 5 years of teaching, I'd never heard Tom Patterson sound scared. "What's your situation?" I asked. "The ropes. Someone cut our ropes. All of them. And there are people moving around on the rock face. People who shouldn't be able to move like that." The radio went dead. Static for 10 seconds. Then nothing. I grabbed my gear and headed for the mountain. The storm was getting worse, but 6 people were trapped up there. One of them was my son. The rescue took 4 hours to organize. By the time we had enough people and equipment, dawn was breaking gray and cold over the mountains. The storm had passed, leaving the rock face coated in ice, beautiful and deadly. I led the team up the standard route, following the same path Michael's group had taken. At 200 feet, we found the first sign of trouble. One of their climbing ropes hung from an anchor point, cut clean through. Not frayed or broken, cut. The end looked like it had been sliced with a surgeon's knife. "Who would do something like this?" asked Jake Morrison, one of my fellow rangers. His daughter Jenny was with Michael's group. I examined the cut more closely. The rope was dynamic climbing cord, designed to stretch under load. Cutting it would take a sharp blade and considerable strength. But more than that, whoever did it would have needed to reach the rope while it was hanging free on the rock face. That meant climbing skills. Expert-level climbing skills. 2. Continued up. At 300 feet, we found more cut ropes. Same precise cuts, same impossible access points. Someone had systematically sabotaged every safety line Michael's group had set. That's when we heard the screaming. It came from above, echoing off the rock walls. A girl's voice, high and terrified. Jenny Morrison. "Dad! Dad, help me! They're coming through the rock!" Jake started climbing faster, his safety protocols forgotten. I grabbed his harness. "Easy. We do this right, or we all die up here." But I was fighting my own panic. That was my boy up there, too. We reached the ledge system at 400 feet just as the sun broke through the clouds. What we found didn't make sense. Michael's group was pressed against the back wall of a narrow ledge, maybe 20 feet long and 4 feet deep. They looked like they'd been awake all night, eyes wide with exhaustion and fear. Their camping gear was scattered, sleeping bags torn, food supplies trampled. "Thank God," Patterson said when he saw us. "They've been gone for an hour, but they'll be back." "Who'll be back?" I asked. Jenny Morrison pointed at the rock face with a shaking finger. "The men with no faces. They came out of the stone." I looked where she was pointing. Solid limestone, no cracks big enough for a person to hide in. No way anyone could approach the ledge except by climbing, and we would have seen other climbers on the mountain. "Tell me exactly what happened," I said. Michael stepped forward. He looked older than his 16 years, like something had aged him overnight. "We were asleep when the storm hit," he said. "Woke up around midnight to check the gear. That's when we found the ropes cut. We figured someone was playing a sick joke, but we couldn't figure out how they got up here. Then we saw them," Patterson added. 3 men in old uniforms, German uniforms like from the war, but their faces," he shuddered. "Smooth. No eyes, no mouth, no nose. Just blank skin where a face should be. They moved through the rock like it was water," Jenny whispered. reached right through the stone and tried to grab us. I wanted to tell them they'd imagined it. Stress, exhaustion, and fear can make people see things that aren't there. But the cut ropes were real. The destroyed campsite was real. And there was something else, a smell hanging in the air. Ozone and metal, like the air after lightning strikes. "We need to get you down," I said. "Now." That's when the temperature dropped 20 degrees in 10 seconds. Frost formed on the rock around us. Our breath came out in white puffs. And from somewhere inside the mountain, we heard a sound like machinery starting up, a low hum that seemed to come from the stone itself. "They're coming back," Michael said. The rock face in front of us began to ripple like water. 3 figures emerged from the solid limestone. I'd seen plenty of things during the war that didn't make sense, but nothing like this. They moved with mechanical precision, wearing Wehrmacht uniforms that looked fresh from the factory. But their faces, God help me. Jenny was right. Smooth expanses of pale skin where human features should have been. "Everyone down, now!" I shouted. The rescue team moved fast, rappelling equipment deployed in seconds. But the hollow men moved faster. One of them reached out with impossible speed, grabbing for Jenny Morrison as Jake lowered her over the ledge edge. I watched its hand pass through the rock face like the stone wasn't there, emerging just inches from Jenny's ankle. She screamed and kicked, and somehow her boot connected with its wrist. The thing recoiled with a sound like grinding gears. "They're solid when they want to be," Patterson gasped as we lowered him down. 2 more hollow men appeared from different sections of the rock face. They moved with purpose, trying to cut off our escape routes. I realized they were hurting us, forcing us toward a specific section of the cliff. "The cave," Michael said, pointing to a dark opening in the rock that I'd never noticed before. "They want us to go in there." I'd been climbing Seneca Rocks for 20 years. I knew every crack, every ledge, every possible route. That cave hadn't been there yesterday. "Down! Everyone down!" I ordered. But as Jake Morrison reached the bottom of his rappel, one of the hollow men materialized directly below him. Its hands closed around Jake's ankles with mechanical strength. I heard bones crack. Jake screamed and tried to pull his sidearm, but the thing moved too fast. It dragged him toward the new cave entrance, his safety rope snapping under the strain. The cut was precise, surgical, just like the climbing ropes. "Jake!" Jenny screamed from above. I made a decision that still haunts me. I could try to save Jake, or I could get the rest of the group to safety. The hollow man was already pulling him into the cave, and there were 2 more of the things moving toward our position. "Keep moving," I shouted. "Everyone keep moving." We rappelled as fast as safety allowed, but it wasn't fast enough. By the time we reached the ground, Jake Morrison had vanished into the mountain. The cave entrance sealed itself, rock flowing together like liquid, leaving no trace it had ever existed. Jenny Morrison collapsed, sobbing. The rest of the group huddled together, staring up at the cliff face where normal rock showed no sign of the morning's impossibilities. "We have to go back for him," Jenny said. "We have to find my dad." I wanted to tell her we would, but I'd seen Jake dragged into solid stone by things that shouldn't exist. And I was starting to remember stories from the war, rumors about German experiments, research facilities hidden in mountains, projects that went beyond conventional weapons. That afternoon, I sent the group back to town with the other rangers. They needed medical attention and safety. But I stayed behind with Michael. If there were answers to be found, they were somewhere in these mountains. "Dad, those uniforms," Michael said as we set up camp in the valley below the rocks. "They looked new." I noticed that too. And the way they moved, like machines. I'd been thinking the same thing. During the war, I'd heard rumors about German research into artificial soldiers, projects that combined technology with other things the regular army wasn't supposed to know about. That night, we heard the machinery sounds again, humming and clicking like a factory running deep underground. Electronic beeps that had no business existing in these mountains. And voices, human voices speaking German, echoing from somewhere inside the rock itself. "There's something down there," Michael said. "Something big." The next morning, we found the entrance. Not the cave that had appeared and vanished during the rescue, but an older opening hidden behind a rock fall on the mountain's north side. The entrance was camouflaged with sophisticated stonework that matched the natural rock perfectly, but there were tool marks if you knew where to look. Engineering work from the 1940s. Michael found the activation mechanism, a sequence of stones that had to be pressed in the right order. German efficiency, even in their hidden entrances. The passage beyond was clearly artificial. Smooth concrete walls, electric lighting that still functioned, air that smelled of machinery and chemicals. We were looking at a German installation that had been operating in American mountains for over a decade. "Dad," Michael whispered, "what did they do here?" I checked my service pistol and started down the tunnel. "We're about to find out." The underground facility was vast, room after room of equipment I didn't recognize, corridors that stretched deeper into the mountain than should have been possible. Everything was clean, maintained, operational. Someone, or something, had been taking care of this place for 10 years. We found the first laboratory 50 feet underground. Surgical equipment, examination tables, and tanks filled with murky liquid. Floating in the tanks were body parts, arms, legs, torsos, but nothing looked quite human. The proportions were wrong, the skin too pale, the joints moved in ways that made my stomach turn. "Jesus Christ," I whispered. Michael was examining a wall covered with photographs and documents. Everything was labeled in German, but the pictures told the story clearly enough. Human subjects being modified piece by piece into something else. The surgical removal of facial features, the replacement of bone and muscle with mechanical components, the step-by-step creation of perfect soldiers who felt no pain, no fear, no doubt. "Dad, look at this." He was holding a file with an English translation paper-clipped to the front. The header read, "Project Ahnenerbe, Hollow Soldier Initiative." I read over his shoulder. Dr. Klaus Richter, SS Oberfuhrer, had been tasked with creating the ultimate soldier, someone who could infiltrate enemy positions, operate behind enemy lines indefinitely, and eliminate targets with mechanical precision. The removal of human emotions and facial features was intended to make them unrecognizable and psychologically disturbing to enemy forces. The POW camp, I realized. It wasn't just a camp, it was a supply source. We found more rooms, dormitories filled with beds that had been slept in recently, a kitchen with food preparation equipment and German military rations dated 1955, a communications room with radio equipment that could reach anywhere in the world. And then we found the storage facility. Row after row of vertical chambers, each containing a hollow man in suspended animation. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, waiting in artificial sleep. But the chamber systems were powering up, lights blinking from red to amber as we watched. "They're waking up," Michael said. A voice spoke from speakers hidden in the walls. Heavily accented English, old and tired but still commanding. "Guten Tag, Theodore Blackthorne." I spun around, gun drawn, but there was no one there. "I am Dr. Klaus Richter. I have been waiting for you." "Where are you?" I demanded. "Everywhere and nowhere. My body died in 1953, but my consciousness lives on in the facility systems. I have been watching your son's climbing group for weeks. The boy has potential." "You son of a bitch. What did you do with Jake Morrison?" "He is being prepared for conversion, as will young Michael be in time. The perfect soldier requires perfect raw material." The chamber systems around us began opening. Hollow men stepping out of their storage units, moving with mechanical precision. Their smooth faces turned toward us, somehow tracking our movements despite having no eyes. "The war is not over, Herr Blackthorne. It has merely changed form. My soldiers will spread across your country, infiltrating your military, your government, your society. America will fall from within." I grabbed Michael's hand. "Run." We ran through corridors that seemed to shift and change around us. Emergency lights flashed red, alarms sounded, and behind us came the sound of hundreds of hollow men moving in perfect coordination. No wasted motion, no hesitation, just mechanical pursuit. We found Jake Morrison in the conversion laboratory. He was strapped to a surgical table, alive but unconscious. Half his face had already been removed, replaced with smooth synthetic skin. Wires and tubes connected him to machines that hummed with artificial life. "Dad!" Michael screamed. But it was too late. Jake's conversion was almost complete. Even if we could wake him up, he wouldn't be Jake Morrison anymore. "I'm sorry you had to see this," Dr. Richter's voice said from the speakers. "But you understand, now. The perfect soldier feels no pain, no fear, no doubt. He follows orders without question and kills without hesitation." "You're insane," I said. "I am efficient. Your friend will make an excellent addition to my forces." The hollow men entered the laboratory surrounding us. There were too many to fight, too many to escape. But I noticed something. They moved around certain control panels carefully, avoiding specific equipment. Dr. Richter might be controlling them, but he was still dependent on the facility's systems. "Michael," I whispered, "the central computer. Can you reach it?" He nodded, seeing what I was thinking. I opened fire on the nearest hollow men. My bullets passed through them when they chose to phase, but solid shots staggered them when they remained material. Michael rolled under a surgical table and came up next to the central control system. "What do I do?" he shouted over the gunfire. "Pull everything, every cable, every connection." Dr. Richter's voice became urgent. "Stop. You do not understand what you are doing." Michael grabbed handfuls of cables and yanked them from their connections. Sparks flew, alarms screamed, and the hollow men around us began moving erratically. Without central coordination, they were just individual killing machines with no shared intelligence. "The biomechanical interface," Richter screamed. "You are destroying 60 years of research." "Good," I said, and shot the main computer console. The explosion threw us both against the wall. Emergency power failed, plunging the laboratory into darkness. In the distance, I could hear the facility's structural supports beginning to fail. Whatever Dr. Richter had done to hollow out this mountain, it depended on active systems to maintain stability. Michael and I stumbled through collapsing corridors, following emergency lighting toward what we hoped was an exit. Behind us, hundreds of hollow men were trapped in a facility that was crushing itself. Dr. Richter's voice followed us through the speakers, growing weaker as his systems failed. "You have doomed us all," he whispered. "The hollow men who escaped. They are still out there." We reached the surface just as Seneca Rock shuddered and collapsed. Not the whole formation, but a significant section of the north face. Tons of limestone crashed down, sealing the underground facility forever. The official report blamed the collapse on natural erosion and ice damage. The climbing area was closed indefinitely for safety inspection. Jake Morrison was listed as a climbing accident victim. His body never recovered from the rockfall. Michael and I were debriefed by military intelligence officers who arrived within hours of the collapse. They already knew about the facility, had known for years apparently, but hadn't been able to locate the entrance. Our discovery had solved a decade-old problem for them. We signed papers that basically said we'd never talk about what happened. National security, they said. Potential panic if the story got out. The usual reasons governments give for keeping impossible things secret. But they were worried about something else. During their investigation of the collapsed facility, they found evidence that some hollow men had escaped over the years. Incomplete records suggested that Dr. Richter had been sending his creations into American society for at least 5 years before we discovered the base. "How many?" I asked. "We don't know," the intelligence officer said. "Could be dozens, could be hundreds." Michael recovered from the trauma better than I did. Kids are resilient that way. But he never climbed again. Couldn't handle being on the rock face, knowing what was buried underneath. He went to college on the GI Bill I never used, became an engineer, moved to a place where the biggest hill is a highway overpass. I stayed at Seneca Rocks for another 15 years. Officially, I was just doing my job. Unofficially, I was watching, making sous. Nothing else emerged from those mountains. There were incidents over the years, climbers who disappeared without a trace, strange reports of figures moving through rock faces, electronic equipment failing near certain parts of the mountain. but nothing as dramatic as that March day in 1955. I retired in 1970 and moved to Florida. Figured I'd had enough of mountains and shadows. But I kept in touch with my replacement, and he kept in touch with his replacement. There's an unofficial network of people who know what's really buried under Seneca rocks. Last week I got a call from the current head ranger. A climbing party had reported seeing figures in old military uniforms moving through the rock face, the same part of the mountain where Michael's group had been trapped. "Maybe it's just kids playing pranks," the ranger said. "Or maybe some of them are still down there," I finished. I'm 85 years old now. Too old to climb, too old to fight, too old to do much of anything except remember. But I still wake up some nights thinking about Dr. Richter's final words. The hollow men who escaped. They're still out there. And sometimes when I watch the news and see politicians or military leaders speaking with perfect composure, showing no emotion even when discussing terrible things, I wonder if their faces are a little too smooth, a little too perfect, a little too much like the hollow men of Seneca rocks. My name is Theodore Blackthorne, and I've told you the truth about what happened in those mountains. Whether you believe it or not is up to you. But if you ever find yourself climbing at Seneca rocks, and you see figures moving through the stone itself, don't try to get a closer look. Just run. My name is Maria Ghosthorse, and I've been a park ranger in West Virginia for 11 years. People always ask about my last name. My mom was half Shawnee, Dad was Irish. Growing up, I heard plenty of old stories from both sides of the family, but I learned early on that the wilderness doesn't care about legends. It cares about facts. Dolly Sod's wilderness is not like other parks. 17,000 acres of high plateau that feels more like Alaska than West Virginia. The elevation changes everything. You can have snow in October while it's 70 degrees down in the valleys. The bog plants up there don't belong in our state at all. Scientists say they're leftovers from the Ice Age, trapped on this mountain when the world warmed up. The terrain plays tricks on you. Everything looks the same. Endless stretches of rocks and stunted trees. Your compass spins like a toy because of all the iron in the ground. Even experienced hikers get turned around. That's why they need rangers like me. October 15th, 1988, started like any other day. I was checking trail conditions after an early snowfall when my radio crackled to life. "Maria, we got another one." Dispatch sounded tired. "Missing hiker report. Bradley Matthews, age 34, from Pittsburgh. Due back yesterday." I sighed. Third one in 6 weeks. "Same area?" "Yeah, northern section near Bear Rocks." I'd been hoping the pattern would break. 3 experienced backpackers, all vanished in the same general area. We'd searched for weeks and found nothing, not even a torn piece of clothing. "I'm heading up there," I said into the radio. "John's already on his way." John Wyndham had been my training officer when I started. 62 years old, knew Dolly Sods better than anyone. If John couldn't find someone, they probably didn't want to be found. The hike to Bear Rocks took me 2 hours. The snow was getting heavier, which meant we'd have to call off any helicopter search. Weather changes fast up there. You might start in sunshine and end up in a blizzard. I found John's truck at the trailhead, but no sign of him. That was odd. John always left notes about which trail he was taking. I called his name, but the wind just threw my voice back at me. The first campsite I found belonged to Bradley Matthews. I knew because his name was written on a piece of duct tape stuck to his tent. Everything was perfect. Too perfect. Tent properly staked down, no rips or damage. Sleeping bag laid out neat as a hotel bed. Camp stove clean and ready to use. But no Bradley. I searched the area for 2 hours. No footprints leading away from camp. No signs of a struggle. No blood or torn fabric on nearby branches. It was like he'd just vanished from inside his sleeping bag. The radio on my belt crackled. "Maria, this is dispatch. John missed his check-in time." My stomach dropped. John never missed check-ins. Never. When was his last contact? 3 hours ago. Said he was investigating something strange near the Matthews campsite. I keyed the mic. "I'm at the Matthews site now. No sign of John. Copy that. We're sending backup, but with this weather... The radio went to static. I tried calling back but got nothing. The snow was really coming down now, and the temperature was dropping fast. I had maybe an hour of daylight left. That's when I found John's radio. It was sitting on a flat rock about 50 yards from the campsite, just sitting there like someone had placed it carefully. John's ranger badge was right next to it, the metal cold as ice. John would never abandon his radio, never leave his badge behind. Something was very wrong. I searched until darkness forced me back to my truck. All night, I kept thinking about those 3 missing hikers. How their campsites looked like movie sets. Eve. Everything in place except the people. And now John. The next morning brought fog so thick I could barely see 10 feet. But I went back up anyway. I had to find John. That's when the strangeness really started. The fog wasn't normal. I've seen mountain fog before. It rolls and shifts with the wind. This stuff hung in the air like it was painted there. Thick as cotton and dead still. I followed the trail by memory, stopping every few minutes to call John's name. The sound seemed to die just a few feet from my mouth, like the fog was swallowing it. About a mile from where I'd found John's radio, I came across something that made my skin crawl. Animal tracks in the mud. Deer, rabbit, even a bear print. But they all stopped at the same invisible line, like the animals had hit a wall. On one side, normal forest floor covered with tracks. On the other side, nothing. Not even bug tracks. The silence was wrong, too. No bird calls, no rustling leaves, no insect buzz. Just my boots on the trail and my own breathing. I was studying the track line when I heard voices. Help! Please! I spun around, hand on my radio. Hello? Who's there? Maria? Over here? It sounded like John, but muffled and far away. I followed the voice deeper into the fog. The temperature started dropping. I could see my breath, even though it had been warm minutes before. John, where are you? This way. Hurry. I pushed through some low branches and stumbled into a clearing I'd never seen before. In the center stood an old camping tent, olive green and obviously expensive. A camp chair sat beside it, and a small fire ring held cold ashes. But the tent was empty. Worse than empty. It looked like whoever had been inside had just vanished mid-action. A book lay open, reading glasses balanced on top. A cup of coffee sat on a camp table, still half full but cold as ice. This had to be from one of the missing hikers. Maybe Jessica Chen. She'd disappeared 4 weeks ago. John? I called again. Silence. I photographed everything, then carefully searched the tent. Jessica's doctor. Ivor's license was in a wallet on the sleeping bag. All her gear was accounted for. Hiking boots lined up neat as you please, clothes folded in her pack. Even her toothbrush was laid out beside a travel-sized tube of toothpaste. People don't fold their clothes when they're running for their lives. I was zipping up the tent when I saw them. Footprints in the soft earth beside the fire ring. But these weren't boot prints. They were bare feet, long, narrow, with toes that stretched further than any human foot should. The prints were deep, like whatever made them was very heavy. But here's the thing that made my hands shake. They had no warmth. I'd seen plenty of animal tracks that had filled with water or ice. These were different. The ground around them was actually frozen, even though the air temperature was above freezing. I followed the tracks to the edge of the clearing where they just stopped. Not like the thing had jumped or climbed a tree. Just stopped, like it had vanished into thin air. My radio squawked, making me jump. Maria, this is Dave Morrison. You copy? Dave was another ranger, young guy with only 2 years on the job. I was glad to hear a human voice. Copy, Dave. What's your location? About 2 miles north of Bear Rocks. Maria, I found something weird. You need to see this. On my way. I marked the campsite with orange flagging tape and headed toward Dave's position. The fog was starting to thin, but the temperature kept dropping. My water bottle was getting slushy. I found Dave standing beside a massive oak tree, staring up at the branches. His face was pale. Look at this, he said, pointing up. High in the oak, maybe 20 feet off the ground, hung a backpack. Not caught on a branch, hung. Someone had carefully placed it there, balancing it perfectly on a thick limb. "That's got to be Bradley Matthews' pack," Dave said. "But how the hell did it get up there?" I studied the tree. No broken branches, no scuff marks on the bark, no rope or climbing gear visible. "Maybe he threw it up there?" I suggested, not believing it myself. "From this angle? That's a perfect placement, Maria. You'd need a ladder." Dave was right. The pack sat on that branch like someone had walked up there and set it down gently. "We need to get it down," I said. "Already tried. Too high for my throw rope." I was about to suggest we find a longer rope when I heard it again, that voice calling for help. But this time, it sounded like Jessica Chen. "Help me, please. I'm lost." Dave heard it too. His eyes went wide. "Was that—" "Jessica Chen's been missing for 4 weeks," I whispered. The voice came again, from deeper in the woods. "So cold. Can't find my way." Dave started toward the sound, but I grabbed his arm. Something was very wrong here. Missing hikers don't survive 4 weeks in Dolly Sods, especially not in October. "Dave, we stick together, and we call for backup first." But when I tried the radio, all I got was static. The fog was rolling back in, thicker than before. That's when we saw it. A shape moving through the trees, tall and thin. Too thin. It walked without making a sound, gliding between the trunks like smoke. For just a second, it turned toward us. I've seen a lot of things in 11 years as a ranger. Bears, mountain lions, even a few people who'd gone a bit crazy from being lost too long. But this thing, I couldn't even tell if it was human. It had arms and legs, a head and torso. But the proportions were all wrong. The limbs too long, the body stretched like someone had pulled it on a rack. And it cast no shadow, even in the dim light filtering through the fog. Dave whispered, "What the hell is that?" The thing stopped moving and turned its head toward us. I couldn't make out features through the fog, but I felt it looking at us, studying us. Then it raised one impossibly long arm and pointed, not at us, behind us. I spun around and saw John Wyndham walking out of the fog movements. He slow and steady. Relief flooded through me, until I got a good look at his face. John's eyes were different, still blue, but vacant somehow, like he was looking through us instead of at us. He walked right up to me and stopped. "Maria," he said in a flat voice, "you need to leave this place." "John, where have you been? We've been searching." "Leave," he repeated. "It's not safe for the living here." "The living?" Dave stepped closer. "John, what happened to you? Where have you been all night?" John looked at Dave like he was seeing him for the first time. Then he smiled, and that smile made my blood run cold. It wasn't John's smile. It was too wide, too knowing. "I've been learning," John said, "about the spaces between, about the ones who never made it across." "Across what?" I asked. John pointed behind me. I turned and saw the tall, thin figure again, closer now. Close enough to see that it wasn't wearing clothes. Its skin was gray as old wood, and it moved without any sound at all. "He's been waiting," John said. "Waiting for someone who could help him finish his work." The thing, and I was sure now it wasn't human, stepped closer. When it moved, the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. Ice crystals started forming on the nearby branches. Dave grabbed my arm. "We need to go, now." But when we turned to leave, more shapes emerged from the fog. At least 3 of them, all tall and impossibly thin, all moving without sound. We were surrounded. The things circled us slowly, and I could see them better now. They looked like people who had been stretched on some medieval torture device. Arms that reached nearly to the ground, legs that bent in too many places, fingers that ended in points. But the worst part was their faces. They had human features, but wrong somehow. Eyes that reflected light like an animal's, mouths that never quite closed. And when they breathed, a third frost came out even though the air wasn't that cold. "John," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, We need to get out of here. John shook his head. They're not here to hurt us. Maria. They're here to collect. Collect what? The ones who got lost between worlds. Dave was breathing hard beside me. I could feel him getting ready to run, which would be a mistake. These things moved too smoothly, too quietly. They'd catch him before he made it 10 steps. The closest one, I started thinking of it as the Shadow Walker, remembering the old Shawnee stories my grandmother used to tell, stepped forward. When it opened its mouth, words came out, but not from its throat. The voice seemed to come from the air around us. You see us, it said. That is unusual. What do you want? I asked. To finish what was started long ago. Too many souls lost in this place. Too many who died badly and couldn't find their way. I thought about the missing hikers, their perfect campsites with no signs of struggle. You took them. We guided them. They were already dying, cold, lost, afraid. We simply helped them transition. Dave made a choking sound. Transition to what? To whatever comes after. They were trapped between life and death, suffering. We ended their suffering. John nodded like this made perfect sense. The plateau has always been a thin place, Maria. The Shawnee knew it. Lots of people have died here over the years. Logging accidents, hunting mishaps, hikers who never made it home. Some of them got stuck. Stuck how? The Shadow Walker tilted its head. When death comes suddenly or violently, sometimes the soul cannot accept the transition. It remains, confused and in pain. We collect such souls and guide them to peace. But the missing hikers weren't dead when you found them. They would have been, soon. The cold would have taken them within hours. We simply accelerated the process, made it gentler. Dave stepped backward, right into another one of the creatures. It put a long-fingered hand on his shoulder and he screamed, not from pain, from cold. Ice was spreading from where the thing touched him, turning his jacket white with frost. Let him go, I shouted. The Shadow Walker looked at me with those reflecting eyes. He will serve our purpose, as will you. We need the living to help guide the dead. What are you talking about? You have the sight. You can see us when others cannot. You can speak to both worlds. We have been waiting for someone like you. I was starting to understand. You want me to help you kill people. We want you to help us save them. The plateau is full of trapped souls, Maria Ghost Horse. They have been suffering for decades. We can end that suffering, but we need someone who walks in both worlds to guide them. John stepped closer. It's not so bad, Maria. Once you accept it, there's no more pain, no more fear. Just peace. John, this isn't you talking. It's more me than I've ever been. I know things now. I understand the bigger picture. Dave was getting paler by the second. The ice was spreading up his arm and his breathing was getting shallow. Whatever that thing was doing to him, it was killing him slowly. Stop, I said. I'll listen to what you have to say. Just let Dave go. The Shadow Walker considered this. He has already begun the transition. To stop now would cause him great pain. I don't care. Let him go or this conversation is over. The creature holding Dave looked to the Shadow Walker, who nodded slightly. Dave stumbled away from it, gasping. The ice on his jacket started melting immediately, but he looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past minute. Smart choice, I told him quietly. Stay close to me. The Shadow Walker moved closer, and I could smell something like old leaves and standing water. There are 43 souls trapped on this plateau, Maria Ghost Horse. Men who died in logging accidents in the 1920s. Hunters who froze to death in unexpected storms. Children who wandered away from their families and were never found. They have been here for decades, in pain, unable to move on. Why can't they move on by themselves? Because they died in fear and confusion. They do not understand that they are dead. They keep trying to return to life, but they cannot. So they remain, caught between worlds, suffering endlessly. We can guide them across, but we need someone living to help them understand. John nodded. I've seen them, Maria. The trapped ones. They're everywhere up here, wandering around, calling for help. It's heartbreaking. And the missing hikers? We're dying anyway, the Shadow Walker said. Cold exposure. Within hours, they would have been trapped souls themselves. We offered them a gentler death and immediate guidance to the other side. It was mercy. Dave was shivering beside me, but his color was coming back. They're talking about murder, he wisped. No, the Shadow Walker said, somehow hearing him. We speak of mercy, of ending suffering that has lasted decades, but we cannot do it alone. The trapped souls will not trust us. We are too different from what they remember of life. They need someone who still lives, someone who can bridge both worlds. I thought about my grandmother's stories, about the old Shawnee belief that some people could walk between the world of the living and the world of the dead. Psychopomps, she'd called them. Guides for souls who couldn't find their way. What happens if I say no? The suffering continues, for them and for future hikers who get lost on this plateau. The spiritual imbalance grows stronger each year. Soon, the boundary between worlds will become so thin that the dead will begin appearing to everyone, not just those with the sight. And if I say yes, you help us guide the trapped souls to peace. The plateau is cleansed, the balance is restored, and you return to your life, changed but unharmed. What about John? John smiled that not quite right smile again. I chose to stay and help. Someone needs to remain as an anchor between worlds. But that choice is mine, Maria. Yours is different. Dave grabbed my arm. Maria, we can't trust these things. They're not human. The Shadow Walker turned its strange eyes on Dave. No. We are what humans become when they accept death fully. We are what awaits on the other side of fear. Then why do you need us at all? Because the trapped souls are still too close to human. They cannot see us clearly. They see only darkness and terror. But you they will recognize as one of their own. You can comfort them as they cross over. I looked around at the circle of creatures surrounding us. In the daylight, they looked less terrifying and more sad, like they had been human once and remembered what that felt like. If I agree to help, I said slowly, what guarantee do I have that you won't just kill me when you're done? We do not kill, Maria Ghost Horse. We guide. If we wanted you dead, you would already be transitioning. Dave was shaking his head frantically, but I was thinking about those missing hikers, about their peaceful campsites and the lack of any struggle. Maybe they really had been dying of exposure. Maybe these creatures really were offering mercy instead of murder. And if there really were trapped souls suffering on this plateau... Show me, I said. Show you what? Show me these trapped souls. Let me see for myself what you're talking about. The Shadow Walker nodded. Very well, but be warned. Once you see them clearly, you cannot unsee them. Your life will never be the same. I understand. It reached out one long, cold hand toward me. Take my hand, Maria Ghost Horse. See what we see. Dave grabbed my other arm. Maria, don't. But I was already reaching out. The Shadow Walker's skin was like ice, but somehow not unpleasant. As soon as our hands touched, the world changed. The moment my skin touched the Shadow Walker's hand, reality shifted like a camera lens coming into focus. The fog cleared, the colors became sharper, and I could see things that had been invisible before. The plateau was full of people. They wandered between the trees, calling out to each other, reaching for things that weren't there. Some wore clothes from decades past, wool work shirts and suspenders, long dresses and button-up boots. Others were dressed like modern hikers, but their gear was torn and muddy. All of them looked lost and afraid. A man in a 1920s logging outfit walked right past me, shouting for someone named Tommy. His eyes looked right through me like I wasn't there. He had an axe wound in his chest that should have killed him instantly, but he seemed unaware of it. A little girl in a faded blue dress sat on a rock, crying for her mama. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old. When I tried to approach her, she looked up with eyes full of terror and ran away, passing through a tree trunk like it was made of air. "How long have they been here?" I asked. "Some for decades," the shadow walker replied. "The child died in 1943. She wandered away from a family camping trip and fell into a ravine. Her body was never found. She has been searching for her parents ever since." Near a cluster of boulders, I saw 3 people I recognized from missing person photographs, the hikers who had vanished over the past 6 weeks. But they looked different now, peaceful. They stood together, no longer afraid, watching the trapped souls with sad expressions. "Jessica? Bradley?" I called out. Jessica Chen turned toward me and smiled. It was a real smile, not like John's strange expression. "Hello, Maria. Don't worry about us. We're okay now." "What happened to you?" "We got lost. The cold was going to kill us slowly over hours. They offered us a quick, painless death instead, and then they helped us understand what had happened so we wouldn't get trapped like the others." Bradley Matthews nodded. "It wasn't scary at all, just like falling asleep. And when we woke up, we weren't afraid anymore. We could see clearly, see what we needed to do, which is help the ones who can't help themselves," Jessica said. "Look around, Maria. Really look." I did. The trapped souls were everywhere, dozens of them, all lost in their own private hells. A hunter from the 1950s kept trying to climb a tree to escape a bear that existed only in his memory. A teenage boy in bell-bottom jeans searched endlessly for a hiking trail that had been moved decades ago. "They're suffering," I whispered. "Constantly," the shadow walker said. "They do not understand that their bodies are dead. They feel cold, hunger, thirst, fear, but they cannot satisfy any of these needs because they no longer have physical forms. It is a torture that has lasted for years." I watched the little girl in the blue dress. She had found what looked like a family campsite from the 1940s, canvas tents and old camping gear that flickered in and out of existence. She kept running to the largest tent, calling for her parents, but when she reached it, the campsite would vanish and she would be alone again. My heart broke for her. "What do you need me to do?" "Touch them," the shadow walker said. "You have a foot in both worlds now. You can be the bridge they need to cross over." "Will it hurt them?" "No. It will be the first relief they have felt in decades." I approached the little girl slowly, the way I would approach a frightened animal. She looked up at me with huge, sad eyes. "Hi there," I said softly. "What's your name?" "Annie," she whispered. "I can't find my mama and daddy. We were camping, and I went to pick flowers, and now I can't find them. Annie, I'm going to help you find them. But first, I need to tell you something important. Can you listen to me?" She nodded. "You got hurt when you were picking flowers. You fell down and got hurt very badly. Your mama and daddy have been looking for you for a long time, but they're not in this place anymore." "I don't understand." I knelt down so we were at eye level. "Annie, your body stopped working when you fell, but the part of you that thinks and feels, that's still here. And there are people waiting for you on the other side who can take you to your mama and daddy." She tilted her head. "Other side of what?" "Other side of being alive. It's not scary, Annie. It's like going home after a very long day." I reached out my hand. "Will you trust me?" She looked at my hand, then back at my face. Slowly, she nodded and took my hand. The moment our skin touched, light exploded around us. Not harsh light, warm, golden light that felt like sunshine and safety and love all wrapped together. Annie gasped, and suddenly she looked different. The fear left her face, replaced by wonder. I can see them, she whispered. Mama and Daddy. They're right there. I looked where she was pointing and saw two figures made of the same golden light, reaching out to her with expressions of joy and relief. Go to them, I said. Annie let go of my hand and ran toward the light. As she reached her parents, all three figures became brighter and brighter until they faded away completely. But before they disappeared, I heard her laughing, the sound of a child who was finally, truly safe. One down, the Shadow Walker said. 42 to go. It took hours. Each trapped soul had their own story, their own confusion and pain. The logger was looking for his friend Tommy, who had died in the same accident 50 years ago. I had to explain that Tommy was already across, waiting for him. The teenage hiker thought he was still trying to find his way back to the parking lot after getting lost in 1978. Some were harder than others. A hunter from the 1960s refused to believe he was dead, even when I showed him the bullet wound in his chest from his own rifle. It took the combined effort of me, the Shadow Walker, and Jessica Chen to convince him to let go of his fear and move on. But one by one, they crossed over. Each time, there was that explosion of golden light, and then peace. Dave stayed close to me through the whole process, unable to see what I was seeing, but trusting me to do what was right. By the time we finished, the sun was setting and both of us were exhausted. Is that all of them? I asked. The Shadow Walker looked around the plateau, which now felt completely different. The oppressive atmosphere was gone, replaced by something that felt clean and balanced. All but one, it said. Who? It pointed to John, who had been watching the entire process with that strange smile. He chose to become an anchor between worlds, part living, part dead. It is a sacrifice that allows us to work more effectively, but it is also a kind of trap. John, I walked over to him. Is this what you really want? He looked at me, and for a moment his eyes were completely normal again. Completely John. Maria, I've seen the other side. It's not scary at all, it's beautiful. But someone needs to stay here to help when more souls get trapped. The plateau will always be a thin place. But you'll be alone. Not alone. Different. I'll still be me, just more than I was before. I hugged him, and he felt solid and warm and completely human. Will I see you again? Whenever you need to, I'll always be here. The Shadow Walker approached us. Our work is finished. The balance is restored. You have done well, Maria Ghost Horse. What happens now? Now, we move on to other places where we are needed, and you return to your life, changed but whole. Will I still be able to see you, to see the other world? When necessary. The sight, once awakened, never completely goes away, but it will not burden you unless there is need. Dave stepped closer. So, this is all real? All of it? The Shadow Walker looked at him with something that might have been amusement. What is real, David Morrison? The pain those souls felt for decades, or the peace they have now, the fear you experience today, or the understanding you will carry forward. Dave shook his head. I don't know if I can live with this knowledge. You will, because you must, because you have seen what happens when death goes wrong, and you will help ensure it does not happen again. The creatures began to fade as the last light left the sky. The Shadow Walker was the last to go. Thank you, it said to me. You have given 43 souls the peace they had been denied. That is no small thing. Thank you for showing me the truth. It nodded once, then vanished into the darkness. Dave and I hiked back to our trucks in silence. The plateau felt completely different now. Peaceful instead of oppressive, natural instead of wrong. Even the wildlife was returning. I heard an owl call from somewhere in the darkness, the first normal forest sound I'd heard in days. We didn't talk about what had happened until we reached the parking area. Dave sat on his tailgate, head in his hands. How do we report this? He asked. We don't. We report that we found evidence the missing hikers died of exposure, but their bodies were recovered by family members. Case closed. But that's a lie. Is it? They did die of exposure. Their souls were recovered and taken home, just not the way most people would understand it. Dave was quiet for a long time. Finally, he looked up at me. Are you okay with all this? Honestly, I wasn't sure. Everything I thought I knew about life and death had been torn apart and put back together in a new configuration. But there was something else too, a sense of purpose I'd never felt before. I think I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, I said. Over the next few weeks, things slowly returned to normal. The missing hiker cases were quietly closed. Dave requested a transfer to a different park. He said Dolly Sods didn't feel right to him anymore. I understood, but for me, it felt more right than it ever had. I started spending more time on the plateau, not just for my regular ranger duties, but because I could sense when something was wrong. The shadow walker had been right about one thing. The sight, once awakened, never completely goes away. 3 months later, I found a lost day hiker who had been missing for 2 days. He was hypothermic and barely conscious when I reached him, but he was alive. As I was getting him warmed up and ready for evacuation, I saw John emerge from the tree line. He looked exactly the same as always, but I could see through him just a little bit. He smiled, his real smile this time, and nodded toward the hiker. Close call, he said. Good thing you found him when you did. How did you know he was here? I know everything that happens on this plateau now. It's part of the job. The hiker survived with no permanent damage. He told the hospital staff that he'd dreamed about a park ranger who sat with him through the coldest night, keeping him warm and telling him help was coming. He described John perfectly, even though John hadn't worn a physical uniform in months. I never told anyone about that conversation. 6 months after the Shadow Walker incident, the Shawnee Nation officially recognized me as a bridge walker, someone who can communicate between the world of the living and the world of the dead. It's not a title they give lightly. My grandmother would have been proud. These days, I still work as a park ranger, but my job has expanded beyond what's written in any manual. I'm the person other rangers call when they find something that doesn't make sense, a campsite that feels wrong, animals that won't enter certain areas, equipment that malfunctions for no reason. Usually it's nothing supernatural, but sometimes I'll be hiking through a section of forest, and I'll see someone who doesn't belong there. Someone in clothes from another era or with injuries that should have killed them instantly. They're always confused, always frightened, always looking for something they can't find. When that happens, I stop what I'm doing and I help them understand. I take their hand and show them the light that's waiting for them on the other side of fear. I help them find their way home. It's not the job I trained for, but it's the job I was meant to do. Last week, a family from Ohio came to the visitor center asking about their grandfather, who had disappeared while hunting in Dolly Sods back in 1967. They'd never found his body, never gotten closure. They wanted to know if there was any chance he might still be out there somewhere. I told them the truth, that their grandfather had found peace long ago, and that he wasn't suffering. They didn't understand what I meant, but something in my voice must have convinced them, because they thanked me and said they finally felt like they could let go of their worry. After they left, I walked out to the plateau and found John sitting on his favorite rock, watching the sunset. That was kind of you, he said. It was the truth. The truth comes in many forms. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the last light fade from the sky. The plateau was peaceful now, balanced in a way it hadn't been for decades, but I knew that balance was fragile. There would always be people who died badly, who got lost between worlds, and when that happened, they would need someone to help them find their way. Do you ever regret it? I asked John. Choosing to stay between worlds? He considered the question for a long time. I regret that I can't share a cup of coffee with you anymore, or feel the sun warm my face the way I used to. But I don't regret the choice. Every soul we helped cross over, every person who finds peace instead of getting trapped, it's worth it. Even if it means being alone. I'm not alone, I'm part of something bigger now. And besides, he smiled, I've got the best partner a guide could ask for. As we sat there, I felt the familiar tingle that meant something was approaching from the other world. A figure emerged from the trees, a young woman in hiking clothes, looking around in confusion. Looks like we've got work to do, John said, standing up. I sighed and got to my feet. What's her story? Car accident on the mountain road 3 days ago. She's been trying to find her way back to her car. Doesn't understand why no one can see her. The woman spotted us and hurried over. Oh, thank God, I've been lost for days. My car broke down and I tried to hike out for help, but I can't find the road anywhere. Can you help me? I looked at her pale face, at the way the moonlight seemed to pass right through her, at the confusion in her eyes that I'd seen so many times before. Yes, I said, reaching out my hand. I can help you. But first, let me tell you what really happened. The work continues. It always will. But I'm not afraid of it anymore. I understand now what my grandmother meant when she told those old stories about people who walked between worlds. We're not meant to be feared or pitied. We're meant to be bridges. Some people are born to heal bodies. Some are born to teach minds. I was born to guide souls home when they get lost along the way. And in Dolly Sod's wilderness, under the endless West Virginia sky, I found exactly where I belong.